that that Freemasonry was a buffer, or it was a preparation for Joseph and for the other Latter-day Saints to receive their temple endowment, at least the men anyway, to be prepared to receive greater truth in a similar fashion that they already had. This is how I see it. God the Father, or rather Jesus Christ, I guess, as the messenger, giving revelations to Joseph, had an endowment ready for Joseph. He said, Joseph, here's what I need you to do, make, these covenants and things like that. And we don't have record of this, so this is me kind of making sense of it. But Joseph knew he had to present the endowment, or give the endowment, or administer the endowment, but he didn't know how necessarily. But as soon as he understood, and maybe he had a little hint of it, or maybe he understood a little bit of that before, but when he actually received the Masonic rituals, he knew exactly how he was going to do it. Now,
Mormonism with the Murph, where Latter-day Saint explores church history and the church's truth claims.
Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, Mormonism with the Murph, where Latter-day Saint explores the church's history and the church's truth claims. I'm continuing my series looking at the temple endowment and connections to Freemasonry. And I have joining me today a fellow member of the church, but also a Freemason, Hayden Carroll. Hayden, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. I think this will be an interesting discussion. So in this episode, what we're planning to do is to explore the connections between Masonry and the Temple Endowment, the critical claim being that a couple of months after Joseph Smith became a Mason, he then introduced the Temple Endowment to some of his followers. Now, Hayden, being a Freemason, he's going to talk about his experience being a Freemason. He's going to talk about the origins of Masonry as well, its origins, the history of it. And then we're going to talk about maybe some of the similarities and differences between our own endowment ceremony and a Masonic ceremony, and maybe just addressing the claim, did Joseph Smith just borrow or plagiarize the temple endowment, the ritualistic aspects from Masonry, and does this not show it's just a modern creation or invention as well? But I think that you'll have a lot of unique insights and experience, because some of us might know a bit about Masonry from like a theoretical standpoint, from researching and reading about it, but it's a whole different thing to be an actual Mason in your experience. So I think you'll have really great insights to bring to this topic.
Yep, absolutely. And I think this is going to be good for Latter-day Saints in particular, right? This presentation, and by the way, Stephen and I talked about, for those listening before the show started, this is a kind of like a presentation, but Stephen and I have agreed that we want him to interject as much as possible, to ask questions, to have this be a dialogue back and forth. Now, that being said, this presentation was created originally for a group of seminary teachers here in the Phoenix area as a training. So this is a presentation catered towards Latter-day Saints, but it's generally for anybody, right? Anybody watching. You don't have to be a Latter-day Saint to learn. But there are going to be a few things in this presentation that you will connect with a little bit more if you are a Latter-day Saint. So anyway, for those watching, that's kind of the intention of the presentation.
Awesome. I think it's important for us as Latter-day Saints or not Latter-day Saints to understand the relationship and connection between Masonry and the Temple Endowment, and to understand what are some of the similarities or some of the differences as well, and maybe to address some misconceptions as well, just have more clarity on the topic as well. But before we get into your presentation, if people are on sort of like different Facebook groups, or they've been watching the Thoughtful Faith channel with Jacob Hansen, you might be a familiar face. But for any listeners who don't know who you are, do you want to tell us a little about your background and relationship with the church before we dive in?
Sure. Yeah, I am a born and raised Latter-day Saint, born in Mesa, Gilbert area outside of Phoenix, and grew up there for 18 years. Then I served a mission after high school in Salt Lake City. And after that, attended Southern Utah University and received my bachelor's in communication. Met my wife there, and we got hired. I went through what they call the pre-service program in the church for seminaries and institutes, and I got hired to teach full time. And they moved us back down here to the Phoenix area, so in Mesa actually. So we've been here since 2018. Since then, I have received my master's degree in professional communication, and most of my time is spent teaching. Obviously, it's summer months. It's July now, so we're out. We're going back to school in a few weeks. But whether it be working or spending time with my family, or online and things like this and presentations regarding gospel topics is typically. I also play in a, I don't know if this is relevant, but I play in a 3-piece punk rock band.
Oh,
And
really? That's cool.
yeah, yeah, we're actually working on our first album here in the next couple weeks, hopefully. So maybe I'll
What
have to.
instrument do you play?
I play lead guitar and vocals. So we have so I play guitar, and then my cousin slash best friend plays bass, and then our best friend plays drums.
Okay. Oh, what's it
So
called? Do you want to give us the name
yeah,
or?
sure, yeah. Our name is called Barehead on the Wall.
All right, I have to
So
look you up. I'll put a
yeah,
link in.
sure, yeah, yeah. I'll send you that link when we get uh those songs dropped. Hopefully, we're actually going to be in the recording studio in what 3 or 4 days. So anyway, it's
Awesome.
kind of fun. That's kind of my hobby.
And I've also seen you participate quite a lot on the Thoughtful Saints
Mm,
Facebook group, which
sure.
can be it's maybe quite a combative or controversial group. Talk about different ideas or different topics. And you've
Mm,
also been on Jacob Hanson's channel. I think you did a debate
mhm,
with Apology as well. So
sure.
you're also engaging a lot on sort of like the online sort of media within Mormonism.
Yep. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Apologia, they came to my ward building maybe 3 or 4 years ago, proselytizing to Latter-day Saints, and I made friends with a couple of the guys there, and so we set up that debate. That was Jacob Hansen and mine and the other two guys who were participating, Daniel and Oscar, their first public, formal debate. So that was kind of, I had been engaging online in online debate, in the comments section, before that. But that was our first real exposure to formal debate. And since then, I've done a few others. And yeah, just I really enjoy having conversations about faith and about reason and about why people believe what they believe. So that's kind of my intention anyway.
Yeah, and some people can, have some dislike towards the Thoughtful Saints Facebook group or
Hmm.
Jacob's channel can be seen as controversial or combative. But I think it's good to have a platform where these topics or ideas are being discussed or even debated, and to hear the different arguments laid forth for doctrinal or historical or
Hmm.
theological positions. So I find it quite interesting. I
Hmm.
think there needs to be different voices, different approaches. I
Yeah.
think dialogue is a good thing as long as we can be respectful, which is a hard line to sometimes follow.
Yep. I
But okay,
think that group, real quick, just on that, for anyone who hasn't joined Thoughtful Faith, I think a lot of people, a lot of what I would consider faithful Latter-day Saints join that group because they see Jacob Hansen and he's a faithful, thoughtful Latter-day Saint, and he has this group, and then they join it and they realize that there's a lot of differing opinions. So for
right,
those in the group who are watching this, you know what I'm talking about. Like it's not it's kind of a battleground every single day. And
yeah, yeah.
most people are pretty nice about it. You do have a few people, right? And we got to work with them. But yeah, if you join the group, don't expect it to be everybody affirming your belief because that's not really the purpose of the group. So anyway,
Which in a way it can be helpful to have sort of like your views or beliefs being challenged in some
yep,
ways. And you kind of have to
absolutely.
be thick-skinned about it as well. Try not to get set
Hmm.
your sort of personal emotions off
Hmm.
to the side in a way.
Yep,
Um,
absolutely.
okay, anything you want to say before we dive into your presentation?
Um, I don't think so. We're gonna go over. Well, I have a little agenda here that I'll show, but we're gonna do an overview of masonry. What is it? You'll feel free to ask me any question you have about it. I'll give my best answer.
Sounds
If I
good.
don't know, if I don't know the answer, I'll say I don't know, and then after that, we'll go over some of the criticisms that people have of Joseph and things like that, like you said.
I'll say to listeners as well that I did a recent interview with Jeff Bradshaw, who's done a lot of really good research and scholarship on temples and Freemasonry as well. So we had a very good conversation about, the origins and the relationship between Masonry and the temple endowment. But this will also be, I think, good. Repetition's always good
Mhm.
as well.
Absolutely. Okay. Do
Alrighty.
you want me to share my screen?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Let me pull this up.
So I think you had some question and answers. I think those are the first few slides, bit of a quiz on Masonry.
Yeah. Here. Let me get this set up. Okay. Can you see just one screen now?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Great. So, um, I've given this presentation several times and I've adapted it over the years or over the last year or two. And the best way that I found to start this is to kind of address the common misunderstandings surrounding Freemasonry and the church. So that's why I start. I just have we don't have to spend a lot of time on each one and well ask any question you have, but just a true or false, just for your listeners to kind of see where they are in regards to their understanding of Freemasonry and its relationship to the church. So what I'll do is I'll just simply read through these and I'll give you the answer. And then if you have a question, we can talk about it. There's a
Alrighty,
few of them.
let's go.
And I think this is good because a lot of people think they know about Freemasonry, and this is going to dispel some of the misunderstandings. Today, Latter-day Saints are officially prohibited by the church from joining the Freemasons due to conflicting oaths that are taken in each organization. I put this one up here because probably people most critical of me joining the Freemasons and being a part of that actively is our Latter-day Saints, because they feel like, oh, oaths are for the temple only, and if you pledge your oath to God through the temple endowment, then you can't do that anywhere else, or you can't make any type of oath. And so the answer, obviously, to this one is false. Now, that being said, for those who are worried about my salvation and my participation in what they consider to be, secret combinations or things like that, and I've said this publicly many times, and I don't have a problem saying this even in front of my Masonic brothers, my allegiance is ultimately to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It's to Jesus Christ, right? So if President Nelson, as his prophet, came out tomorrow and said, Brother Carroll, we're going to ask you to rescind your membership from the Freemasons, I wouldn't think twice about doing so. So just so
Right.
for
So your
people
allegiance to
who,
the church is above your
oh, absolutely,
allegiance to membership as a Mason.
oh, 100%, and my Masonic brothers support me in that, right? We're going to talk about here in a second. You do have to believe in a higher power to be a Freemason. You're not allowed to be an atheist.
Right.
So with that being said, that kind of comes with the package, right? If I'm going to believe in a higher power, my allegiance is to that, not to a man-made organization, which Freemasonry is.
Gotcha.
Okay, number 2, you can only join the Freemasons if you are personally invited by another Mason. This is probably the most misunderstood concept or idea of Freemasonry. The answer to this one is false. I'll talk about here in just a second. I have some information. Freemasons don't proselytize, right? We're not going out seeking Masons. Like like Stephen, is as a great as a guy as you are, I wouldn't come to you and say, hey, I think you should join the Freemasons. Rather, I would have to wait for you to talk to me about it.
Okay. So
So
I'd
we're
have to
actually,
initiate interest in wanting to
yes,
join.
yes, 100%. Now I could talk about it and I could be excited about it, but I can't ever say, hey, I think you should join. Now, if you talk to me, I might say something like that, but I cannot initiate it. So a lot of people think, oh, it's a secret society, so I just have to wait around until they approach me. It's the exact opposite. You have to express interest. Okay, true or false? Freemasons made up some of the mob that killed Joseph and Hiram at Carthage. This one, I hope
That'd be
most
true.
people, yeah, I hope most people would know this one is true. And there's a lot of details there, and we'll talk about Carthage here in a second, but that's definitely true. They were angry for reasons that we'll talk about in a little bit.
Yeah.
True or false? This is one that a lot of people worry about. The Freemasons' ultimate goal is to take over the world.
Please say it's true. It's gotta be true.
Well, even if it was true, could I tell you? I put this one up here, and here's the thing: the conspiracy theorists who are already believe this, me saying it's false, which it is false. I mean, what does that mean? Take over the world, right? A lot of people will associate us with the Illuminati, with the cabal, right? They see us basically as this unknown secret group that's trying to do bad things. So, as far as I'm concerned, and I can say this in full honesty, I have never seen anything immoral whatsoever in regards to the goals of the Freemasons. And we'll talk about what the goals of the Freemasons are in a second. This has nothing to do with
And
it.
sort of related to that, like sometimes you would see certain Orthodox evangelical Christians hint at Freemasonry having like almost like satanic elements in it that they would say is very much opposed to like pure Christianity. Would you like to address that those people who are Masons or engaged in Masonry, that this is somehow satanic or evil, or some of the symbols like pentagram and stuff?
Sure, it's the exact opposite. There's nothing about Satan in any of the 3 degrees I've been in, and those who I know who have entered into higher degrees, or other degrees rather, not higher, but other degrees in the Scottish and York Rite. I know nothing of worshiping Satan or anything like that. It's actually the opposite. It's actually Christ-centered and Bible-centered.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, think about it, like this is what I say to Latter-day Saints who have an issue with me being a member. Think about how evangelical Protestant Christians think about us. They think about how they think about our temples, right? They
Hmm.
think that we're worshiping, like for example, there is a in Temple Square on Temple Square in Salt Lake City, in the by the Christus statue or the statue of Christ upstairs in the Northern Visitor Center. If anyone has ever been there are some upside down stars in there. And I had an investigator. I served in Salt Lake, so we often used Temple Square as a teaching tool. And I had probably one or two probably who noticed that, investigators who noticed those upside down stars. And they basically said, "Whoa, isn't that like Satan worship?" And I'm like, "I don't think so." And as a young missionary, I didn't know exactly. And actually, I can't say to this day specifically what that architecture means in the visitor center. But you and I know that as we've gone through the church and through the temple endowment and things like that, there's no worship of Satan whatsoever. So that's how I explain it to Latter-day Saints. You probably feel that way because you've watched National Treasure or because you've watched other movies where Masons are depicted as this, right?
A
As
lot of
evil.
those symbols go back anciently as well, and they were sort of repurposed over time how
Mhm.
people would interpret those symbols. That's not always the meaning that they had originally.
Right. And actually, we're going to talk about that. Masonry is fully symbolic, right? It's 99% symbolic. And part of that is that we didn't create these symbols, right? The founders of Masonry didn't create the symbols, but we're using them for a different purpose. And we'll talk about that here in a second.
Yeah.
Okay, well, speaking of symbols, the all-seeing eye is a symbol created by the Freemasons. This one became popular through, I've already mentioned it's false, but became popular through the Disney movie National Treasure.
Good move.
Now, yeah, right. And it's good. And Masons don't have an issue with this. There are some things that are embellished and things like that, and it's kind of fun. But actually, as I have done my research, the first record that I've been able to find of the all-seeing eye is actually by a Catholic artist, last name Pontormo. I'm not sure if
Hmm.
I'm saying that correctly. In 1525, he kind of has a Last Supper painting here, and on the top is the all-seeing eye representing God. So, do the Freemasons use the all-seeing eye? Yes, we do. But did we create it? No, because Freemasonry, as we know it today, probably was not around in 1525. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit, the origins of that.
Okay.
Okay, true or false? The group of men who received the first modern temple endowment were all Freemasons. This one, some people are shocked to know that this one is true. All of the brethren who received the temple endowment first before the general Latter-day Saint population were all Freemasons. And I personally, and I'll talk about this towards the end, I personally see this as a preparation for them to receive the temple endowment. Not that it's necessary for any of us necessarily, but it was for them. It was helpful for them. The Masonic rituals are identical to the LDS Temple Endowment. This one, I hope people can just realize or even assume that this one is obviously false. Now,
Hmm.
are there some similarities in teaching style? Absolutely. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit.
Right. The key word is identical.
Yeah, identical. Yep. And here's the thing. I wouldn't even say they are super similar. They're similar in a few ways, in one large way, but it's not actually doesn't actually have to do with anything doctrinal at all,
Hmm.
or regarding covenants or ordinance, not at all. So I'll explain that here in a little bit.
Yeah.
So really quick, this is kind of what you can expect: an overview of Masonry, talking about what it is and what its purpose is, talking about Masonic lore, and I have that who's endowed in there because I taught an institute class on this not too long ago. If you're endowed and you're watching this, it's gonna mean a little bit more to you. You're gonna understand a little bit more about what I'm talking about here. We're gonna talk about Freemasonry's influence on Joseph and the early saints. We're
Yep.
gonna talk about the critics' claims regarding Joseph and Freemasonry and talk about whether or not those claims are accurate. We'll talk about the origin of Freemasonry and where they received their ritualistic nature. And I'll give the perspective of an LDS Freemason on the connection between Freemasonry and rituals and the temple endowment. And then, we'll do questions along the way. When I present this, we do Q&A. We give a Q&A time at the end. So,
No,
okay,
great things to cover.
do you have any questions about that, about the way we're going to do that?
No, that sounds good. If any questions come my way, I'll interject them throughout, but I think
Yeah,
that's really good things that we're covering.
please do. I think it's always better. And I tell this to my classes when I teach this. It's always better for somebody to raise their hand and start a conversation rather than me just presenting. So feel free to do that.
Okay.
Okay, so just as a basis for anybody who's watching this who has no idea what Freemasonry is whatsoever, they're like, what even is that? Is that, they have no clue. Freemasonry is a fraternal organization with its purpose. And when I say fraternal is a men's only, and there are women's branches of Freemasonry, but I'm only familiar with the men's version. A
Okay.
fraternal organization. Basically it's a group of men who get together for a couple of reasons: to perform service, to help those in their community, to form a brotherhood, or to have unity, community, and camaraderie. It's kind of like, if you're a Latter-day Saint, it's like it's what elders quorum should be. It's kind of how the way I say it, right?
Okay.
Not every elders quorum I've been in has been united,
Not
right?
as united as a Masonic Brotherhood.
Yeah, yeah, and that's one thing that I think the church could learn from the Freemasons is how to have a brotherhood. They do it really well.
Okay.
And there are reasons why the church struggles with that, and that's for another conversation. But we focus on that. And then number 3, which is probably my favorite part of all this, and this is the reason, one of the reasons I wanted to get involved, was the moral self-improvement of its members. The way I like to describe it is Freemasonry is an organization where guys get together and they teach each other how to live good moral lives.
Hmm.
So it's one thing about Masonry is it doesn't offer salvation. It talks about God and the great architect, and that's what the G stands for. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But it doesn't offer salvation, right? Nowhere in Freemasonry, when you take the oath, do they say you must do this in order to be saved. They don't even talk about salvation at all. It's more of a temporal, while you're living here's a way to live your life.
How to make your community, your society better, your
Yes.
relationship with family
Yes.
members, friends,
Yep.
yeah,
Your
helping the
marriage,
community.
everything. Totally. So if you're Latter-day Saint watching this, realize that this is not a substitute for religion. This is not a substitute for exaltation, right? Or authority. They don't claim authority. They don't want to claim authority. It's not like that.
Okay.
Okay. Next, Freemasonry teaches its members principles of morality and personal progression / growth through symbols and allegory, which is very similar to the church in lots of ways, and we'll talk about that. Freemasons must believe in a God. In other words, you can't be an atheist, because part of the temple, or part of the I was going to say temple endowment, which is true. Part of the 3 degrees of Blue Lodge Masonry, which we'll talk about here in a second, is part of that is believing in a God, or pledging to a God or to a higher power, right? Being accountable to something greater than yourself, so that you can be accountable, and you're accountable to your brothers as well, but more so to your God. Now,
The
you
doctrinal or
don't.
theological views of God in Masonry don't matter. Is it just some sort of belief in a higher
Correct.
power or deity, whether or not
Yep. Yep.
it's
You could be a
Allah or
Jew.
the Christian
Totally.
God or whatever?
Totally. Yep. There are Muslim brothers and Jewish brothers, and as long as you are not an atheist, I think most are probably Christian. I can't speak outside of Utah, which is where I'm affiliated right now, and I'll talk about that. But most of the brothers probably in Utah a lot of them are Latter-day Saints, maybe not active, all of them. Some of them are, but not all of them. But I would say most Masons in America are probably have some roots in Christianity, would be my guess. Whether
Okay.
or not they're practicing Protestant, Catholic, whatever, that depends on each person. Last but not least, Freemasons do retain a theme of privacy regarding its rituals, rites, and passages, kind of like we do with our temple, kind of the same
Hmm.
thing.
So
Now,
I want to ask a
oh
question
yeah,
on that,
yeah, please
because
do.
the very quick saying that we give about why we don't talk about some of
Mm-hmm.
the ritual things or some of the things we covenant to in the temples. We talk about that, it's sacred versus secret, and we
Mm-hmm.
hold those things sacred. What's sort of the
Mm-hmm.
explanation given
Mm-hmm.
by Masons for why they keep certain aspects of their rituals or their rites
Mm-hmm.
sort of
Mm-hmm.
secret or private?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we don't have a problem saying it is secret. It's secret because we wouldn't use the word sacred, and I probably wouldn't use the word sacred. I mean, you probably could, because it has truth, and truth is sacred, right? But this is not like a holy, divine ceremony, right? This is not. We're not protecting it because God told us to. Nothing like that. This
Yeah.
is, if you are a person, a man who can qualify to to have an upstanding moral character, who can qualify to receive these lessons, essentially, or degrees, then we have no problem sharing with you. But if you don't, then it's a secret. It's a secret kept from those who are not ready to receive it. And that kind of have some overlap with the temple as well, but I
Is it
wouldn't
almost
use
like
the
a sign of
words.
like allegiance or loyalty in a way?
Yeah, I mean,
regulation.
part of the oath is not to share specific parts of the ritual.
Hmm.
The oaths that you take one oath per degree, at least in Blue Lodge Masonry, which is the first 3 degrees, right? There's entered apprentice, and actually, I'll wait on that because I actually have a slide for the degrees. So,
Okay.
yep, yeah, we don't have a problem just saying it's a secret, Okay, we don't have to
Right.
read this, but if your viewers want to pause the video and read through this is actually a paragraph from the church's website, from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saint. They have a few articles on Masonry. This is a great one, basically, and I'll go over these things here in a second, but basically it's an overview of what Masonry is and where it came
It's a good
from.
summary, isn't it? It's brief, but
Yeah.
it gives someone quite a good sort of general
Yep.
understanding and
Mhm.
overview of what Masonry is and the connection
Mhm.
between the Temple
Mhm.
Endowment and Masonry.
Absolutely. So they can read that, and we'll talk about that. Okay, so just for fun, notable Masonic figures in history. We have a lot of the founding fathers, including George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Andrew Jackson here on the $20 bill. I always joke that if you ever paid, for something with a $20 bill, that you've endorsed Freemasonry because he's on the 20. So just kind of as a joke. We have Isaac Newton, Mozart. We have Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, John Wayne,
Oh, I didn't know
Michael.
he was a Mason.
Yeah, Michael Richards, who plays Kramer, Cosmo Kramer on Seinfeld, and Shaq. So you can kind of see that any man can join Freemasonry, and a lot of the most successful people in the world. Well, I would say, it's I would not be surprised to find out that a very successful person was a Freemason. Not saying all of them are,
Okay.
but just kind of fun. Okay, so those are non-LDS. These are LDS Masonic figures, and I like to show this because one of the things that I never understand is when a Latter-day Saint can look me in the eye and tell me that I'm wrong for joining the Freemasons, when considering that all of these individuals were Freemasons and they revere these people, right? They support these
Yeah.
people.
All of our
Joseph Smith,
heritage.
yes, Joseph Smith himself was a Freemason. I'll talk about how he became one. Hiram, his brother, obviously. Their father, Joseph Smith Sr., Heber C. Kimball, who was a great apostle, Oliver Cowdery, who was the main scribe for the
I
Book of
didn't actually
Mormon.
know Oliver was a Mason as well. Okay.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, and there's probably more. I mean, I just fit the 10 on the screen that I could fit. There's probably way more. You
Hmm.
have Martin Harris, right, who was a great supporter of Joseph in the beginning of the Restoration. Obviously, Brigham Young,
Hmm.
John Taylor, Wilford Woodruff, Lorenzo Snow, and probably some others. I actually would have to do. I maybe I should have looked it up beforehand. I would maybe say that Lorenzo Snow was the last Freemason. Um, because I don't think Joseph or who would it have been? Yeah, is it Joseph F? Yeah, Joseph F. Smith. I don't know if he was a Freemason. I'd have to look at that. So
Right. So a
anyway,
lot of
just
really key figures, early leaders, and
mm-hmm.
first few prophets of the
Yes.
Restoration were Masons as well.
Yes. So everything I'm about to describe to you, all of these men were very familiar with all of these things.
Hmm.
Okay, so the origin of Joseph joining Freemasonry in Illinois. There was a man named Abraham Jonas who was a Jewish man in Illinois. And long story short, he helped to start the lodges there in Illinois and eventually became the Grand Master of the Grand Lodge. Now, just so people understand, in Masonry, the buildings that we use, there's a difference between a lodge and a Grand Lodge. The Grand Lodge is kind of like the stake center, like to compare it to Latter-day Saint buildings, where
Okay.
we have chapels that are housed by the wards, and then you have a stake center where like the stake offices, the stake president has his office, right? Same thing with Masonry, right? And there's probably some overlap there. I would have no doubt that Latter-day Saints maybe thought that was a great way to organize themselves, is to have
Towards the state.
one. Totally, and not that the Freemasons or Latter-day Saints are the only organizations in the world that do it like that, but I would have no doubt that there was some influence there.
And that's
Abraham
different
Jones, yeah.
from their temples as well, because Masons have temples, but
Oh,
that's separate from like their lodges,
oh,
grand lodges. Is that correct?
oh no. So yeah, so it actually would be each of them are considered temples.
Oh,
So
they
yeah,
are. Okay.
so like a lodge would be considered a Masonic temple along with the Grand Lodge. And
Oh, okay.
as I understand it, the temple is just because there's a lodge room in there where those rituals can be performed. So any of them can be considered a temple. So
Didn't
yeah,
know
it's
that.
kind
Okay, that was a misunderstanding. That was good clarification. That was a
yeah.
misunderstanding I had.
Yeah,
Okay.
because I'm not aware of any Masonic temple that's not a lodge building or a Grand Lodge building already.
Okay. Okay. Very good.
For Abraham Jonas, he essentially was a politician. And just long story short, as I understand it, it looks, and I think probably most historians who are familiar with this history would agree that Abraham Jonas, as you see on the bottom there below Joseph's name, made Joseph Smith Jr. a Mason on site, which meant he didn't have to like go through the process of petitioning the lodge. Now he did have to receive the degrees, and I think he did within a couple of days received all 3 degrees. To put it in perspective, it took me 6 months to petition the lodge, and then probably another 6 months to receive the 3 degrees.
And when you
So
say petition, is that sort of like receive permission to sort of like
it's
apply or
yeah, apply. It's an application process where they
okay.
would basically do a background check on you, and at least in Utah, I would assume that's similar, at least in the United States, is you have to be a member, or you have to rather know a member of the lodge for at least 6 months before you can join. So when I joined, and I'll tell my story here in a second, I didn't know anyone from the Cedar City Lodge in southern Utah, and so I had to attend some informal meetings and for about 6 months. Well, for 6 months, it was required 6 months before I could ask them to join. And so Joseph was a little bit different. The Grandmaster, and I think even today, has the authority to bypass that 6 month period or probationary state. So what I was going to say is it really does, and not to say Joseph, didn't earn it, but it kind of looks like a political move on Abraham Jonas's part. He saw the Latter-day Saints were growing, and Joseph as their leader, he was seeking political office. Abraham Jonas was. And so I think it's fair probably to say that this was a political move on his
Mm.
part to let Joseph in as soon as possible. His brother was already a Mason, Hiram, and his father was. So I don't think he had any issues morally, right? It wasn't like he was letting in someone who was going to be an issue. But he just said, nope, you come in. You're good. You're good to go.
You passed the
And
test.
yep. And I think he was seeking the political approval of the Latter-day Saints. So that's kind of some history there. Okay, the degrees. On the bottom, today we're only talking about the bottom 3 because these are the only 3 that I have received. We call this Blue Lodge Masonry. On the bottom, we
I'm
have
thinking
the
those are the 3 that Joseph received as well. I'm not aware that you received any others.
Correct. Yeah, there's a common misunderstanding that Joseph went up the Scottish Rite and became a 33, degree Scottish Rite Mason. That is untrue, and we know that because the Scottish Rite was not available, right? There were no Scottish Rite Masons in his area. So one way to look at this is, at least in the mind of a Mason, the 3 degrees, you start as the first degree is an entered apprentice, and you receive that ritualistically, and I'll show you some pictures of what I can to show you that ritual and explain it as much as I can without overstepping my oath.
Right.
The second one is the second degree fellowcraft, and then the third degree is a master mason. These are the 3 degrees, the only 3 degrees that Joseph received. These are also the degrees that I received, and so I can speak on behalf of them appropriately. The other degrees that you see on the left and right, on the left you have the York Rite, and this is an organization both Scottish and York Rite is seen as a lateral move, right? So when you become a Master Mason, that's like the highest, if you will, that you can become in Freemasonry. You can receive the other degrees of the Scottish and York Rite, but amongst Masons, it's not seen more authoritative. It's simply, as far as I understand it, without having received them myself, these are simply lessons, moral lessons. It's furthering your understanding of the world and how to live a moral life, essentially. So you can see
rituals as
on
well.
they are
Those other
rituals.
ones.
I can't say because I have not received them.
Come
As far
through.
as I understand, I'll show you. Actually, I took some pictures. I was in Boston this last weekend. I took some pictures in their Grand Lodge, and I'll show you a place where they do their Scottish Rite. And a lot of it is a presentation, almost like a play, like a drama.
Right.
So, and they receive those lessons through watching that. And I'll show you, and there's some similarities that kind of looks like the endowment room. I'll show you here in a second. But as you look at these, don't be confused or overwhelmed by these numbers. This is simply learning more and more. And as you receive each degree, you learn more. You can see on the top left, on the York Rite, you see the Order of the Knights Templar, right? Once you receive, as far as I understand, once you receive that, that's like a whole new organization where they perform their own rituals and do things like that. I don't know much about that. So,
Okay.
anyway, do you have any questions about the degrees? as much as I can tell you, I will. But
No, I think probably what's most relevant to our discussion with regards to like Masonry and our own Temple endowment is
Mhm.
just those 3 degrees of entered
Yep.
apprentice, fellow craft, master mason. Because if Joseph Smith wouldn't have received the others, they're probably not as relevant to
No.
this discussion. But still, people are really interested in wanting to know more
Hmm.
about them. People can check that out.
Yep. They can pause the video and go look at that. But I agree with you. Okay, so how does someone become a Freemason? I can just tell you my quick story about how and why I joined really quickly.
Yeah, I'm really interested to know that. Like, did you have family
Hmm.
members or friends that were Masons? What
Hmm.
what sort of motivated you
Hmm.
to want to become a Mason? And then
Hmm.
when did you do it? And then how did you go about it?
Hmm. Yep. So my first interaction with the word Freemasonry, I probably watched National Treasure like in high school, but I didn't know what that. I didn't even know it was an organization. I had no clue it was an entity, whatsoever. And so that kind of went in one ear and out the other. When I served a full-time mission in Salt Lake City, as luck would have it, or maybe it was destiny, I was companions. I think you might know him. I was companions with Timber Harward. Do you know Timber at all?
Not personally, but I've seen him. He was on that Jubilee episode.
Yeah, yeah,
On
yeah.
that.
He was there with Cardin and
Yeah,
Quaker.
yeah. So I know
Yep.
of him. I'll have to bring him on my show sometime.
Yeah, oh, he's awesome, and he has a great story, and he's wonderful, and he knows the doctrine. He's just an awesome guy.
Hmm.
It's funny though that we were companions in the western side of Utah in a place called Erda, or Tooele Valley, or Tooele County. And the first time I really heard about Freemasonry was actually from Elder Harward. He was not a Freemason, and I don't think is a Freemason to this day. But he and I can't remember how it came up. Maybe we had an investigator, Timber. If you're watching this, I think it was Assinet and Kent Warner. I think Kent had some issues with Freemason. It was a guy we were teaching or at least visiting, and so maybe I think he might have brought it up, and then I was like, I don't know what that is, and then other Harvard kind of talked to
That
me about
in
it.
regards to our Temple endowment criticisms with
Um. Oh
Masonry
yeah.
Temple
Oh
endowments.
yeah. Yeah. This family was salt of the earth, the nicest people in the world to this day. They had some issues though with the lots of Book of Abraham and other. I think they read the CES letter probably is what happened.
Okay.
But they might have mentioned Freemasonry and the Temple Endowment and things like that. And Elder Harvard told me a little bit about it, and so I didn't really know much about it. Anyway, so that was my first kind of understanding of what it was at all. And I don't think I really still understood what it was. Later in my mission, probably about a year, maybe a year later, a little less than maybe 6 months later, I was serving in downtown Salt Lake, and I came across a guy in an apartment complex, and he was a active Latter-day Saint, and he mentioned that he was a Freemason. I can't remember how it came up, to be honest. So that was my second kind of touch with Freemasonry, and I didn't really think much about it. And he might have been, invited me to look into it. I can't remember if I really expressed, much interest. But I went home. I got off my mission. I in July of 2015 came home for a month, and then I immediately went to college in Southern Utah University. While I was there, I joined a college fraternity called Sigma Chi, and that's similar to Freemasonry, but for college students, essentially undergrads.
Not as cool
And
as Cobra Kai, but Sigma Chi.
okay, yeah. Wait, sorry, say that again. Say that one more time.
I said not as cool as Cobra Kai. That's reference
Oh
to
yeah,
the show Cobra Kai, which
oh
is
yeah.
like
No,
done like 30 years after the Karate Kid movies.
sure, yeah, never seen Cobra Kai, but yeah, maybe not as cool. But what kind of just a little side note there. One of the reasons that I joined Sigma Chi, because I didn't really know what a fraternity was. I was approached during rush week, my first or second, probably second or third week of school there. So I was a freshman right off the mission. And when the brothers there found out that I was a Latter-day Saint, they quickly made sure I knew that both President Nelson and Elder President Ballard were both Sigma Chi's at the University of Utah. So as a return missionary, as someone who loves the prophets, that piqued my interest. And so I ended up joining. And it's very similar, right? There's rituals and there's other tokens and things like that that the brothers would use.
Mm.
Now, while I was a Sigma Chi, I started to learn through the origin of Sigma Chi that a lot of it was Masonic based. That the founders of Sigma Chi either were Masons or heavily influenced by Masons in their life, and we have some overlap, Sigma
Okay.
Chi and Freemasonry. So that kind of piqued my interest. And then another reason I piqued my interest is because I started to learn more and more about the criticisms of Joseph being a Freemason in regarding to the Temple endowment and things like that. So there was a lodge, luckily, within a 1 minute or 2 minute drive of my apartment while I was at college. And so I called Elder Harward and I said, "Hey, how do are you a Freemason? Yeah, I know you're talking about it." And he said, "No, I'm not." And I said, "Well, do you know how do I learn about it? What do I do?" He said, "To be honest, you probably just look up their number and call their secretary." And that's what I ended up doing. So I called their secretary. His name was Terry. He passed away recently. But he said, "Yeah, come down. We meet Tuesdays and Thursday nights for like an open house for anyone who's wanting to learn about it. We play some board games. They played Monopoly and Battleship and Stratego, and so I went down there and they drank their coffee and I drank my Sprite and we just had conversation, and that was the start. That must have been sometime in 2016. That was the start of my petitioning, or like that process of meeting with them for 6 months. So
And how much of you wanting to join, Freemasonry, was it real desire to want to just join the fraternity and the
mhm,
organization? Was it
mhm.
partly out of curiosity, because
Yep,
of the criticisms that look at all
yep,
the similarities between both
yep.
the Masonic ceremony and our
Mhm.
endowment ceremony? Joseph just took it and then, recreated the temple endowment. Were you also sort of curious to see just how similar are they to really experience both? Or was it more the prior that you just really wanted to join the organization?
That's a great question. I would say it's probably, I would say equally both. Like by the time I was in Sigma Chi and we were already doing rituals and really awesome things, and learning moral lessons, I was just as interested in joining the Freemasons for that purpose, like after college, because although I'm an alumni of Sigma Chi, I'm not an active in a chapter, obviously. Freemasonry, I saw as like, hey, this is an opportunity to extend that throughout my life. And I mean, you can never have too many friends, right? You can never network enough. Like I just like I could in the church, go to a different country and meet a Latter-day Saint or a bishop there and be taken care of or being helped there. Same with Freemasonry. For example, I got an email probably, and it doesn't happen very often, but maybe a year ago, and it was from the Grand Lodge of Utah. And they said, "Hey, everyone in Utah, all the Masons in Utah, we have a brother coming from Brazil. He's going to get a surgery in Salt Lake, but he doesn't have a car. He doesn't have a place to stay. So we need a brother to pick him up from the airport, to take him to his appointment, to wait for him to get his outpatient surgery, then to take him into your home or take him to a home and take care of him essentially. Like this brother needs our help." And although I was living in Phoenix at the time and I wasn't able to help, there was a brother immediately within like an hour. We got another email that said, "Thank you, everyone who wanted to help. It's taken care of." So
Wow.
that's kind of the power, and you see that in the church as well. I think
Yeah,
we
so
could
it's not
put
just encouraging you to do service, but as a group, as a fraternity, you're actually
yes,
kind of like collaborating together,
yes,
similar to like an elders quorum or a relief
yes,
society, to serve and
totally.
help people.
Totally. And I get chills just thinking about it. Like it really is, it's a brotherhood where they actively ask you to participate. And like that was kind of an interesting circumstance and doesn't happen every day like that. But for example, if I needed to go somewhere else, I could contact, I'm sure, the Grand Lodge or the lodge of wherever I'm going and say, "Hey, I need help," or whatever, and they would help in a heartbeat. That's part of our oath, right? Is to look out for the brother.
And this is maybe just speculation. This just popped into my head, but I believe, if I'm getting history right, was the Relief Society, was it created after Joe Smith became a Mason? And I wonder how much that might have been
Hmm.
influenced or inspired from that as well. I'm sure there might have been other things.
You
Um,
know,
but just as you were saying that, the connection between that sort of organization trying to help each other and serving others, between like what we have in Elders Quorum or the Relief
yep.
Society.
Yep. Okay, you know it's funny. I just Googled it. The Relief Society was started March 17th, 1842, which is like 2 months before Joseph became a Mason.
No,
So
well,
he,
I think he became a in early March, but I think it was May that the
oh,
Valentine was introduced. So I think that sounds like a couple of weeks.
you may be
I can
right.
double check.
Actually,
Maybe
I
I'll
actually
double
have
check
a
it
I
here.
have a slide that's farther down the line that I don't know if I have the exact date that he became a Mason, but it was early 1842. So you may be actually be right. We'll have to check
I
that.
can find it here as you keep going. I'll find the date because I know I
Okay.
have it in one of my slides somewhere.
Okay. So to finish my answer to your question, it really was a combination of me wanting to join for the service and brotherhood and camaraderie and moral aspect of Freemasonry. But just as equally, I was interested in the criticisms of ex-Mormon or whatever on Joseph joining like I wanted to know. Kind of what I used to tell myself is like, there's really only one true way to know if these criticisms are true. I could look online and I'm sure you can find Masonic rituals online. You definitely can. Not that I'm
Mhm.
encouraging anyone to do that. Kind of like the endowment, right? But the only true way for me to know about these criticisms is to join myself.
Experience it firsthand for yourself. And by the way, I
Yes.
just got the date, 15th
Okay.
and 16th of March. Joseph
You,
became a Mason.
oh,
So
so that was the next day, literally.
yeah, yeah. Well,
Okay, yeah, so that makes sense. That really makes sense. And it was for a good reason. So anyway, yeah, that's to answer your question. Do you have any other questions? That's kind of how someone becomes a Freemason. If I'm not necessarily proselytizing, but if someone's interested, they would call a lodge and
um,
just ask them.
I don't know if you're going to cover this later, but like for example, like what would you say that your membership sort of like being a Mason sort of like
Mm-hmm.
consists of? Like
Oh, sure.
how regularly would you meet sort of with your
Yes.
your brotherhood or your fraternity?
Yes.
Yeah, what sort of it like on sort of like a weekly basis? Because some people might know a bit about Mormonism or say the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but unless you're really a member, you don't really know what it's like on a
Yep.
weekly sort of basis.
Sure. Yeah, so I can only speak for my lodge. So full disclosure, I'm not currently affiliated with a lodge in Arizona. I probably will be here in the next couple of years. When we moved down, our first son was born pretty quickly, and so life was busy and things like that. My career was just getting started. I did visit the Scottsdale Lodge near Phoenix a few years ago and met with them and was going to start the process, and then it fell through the cracks on my part. Didn't pursue it for lots of different just scheduling issues on my part. But yeah, so that being said, I still am affiliated with Southern Utah with Cedar City Lodge number 34. I pay my dues to them. I pay $130 a year to them every January, and then they send me a dues card, and it's honestly like a temple record. I can actually show you. Um, actually have it here. I have a little bag with some little trinkets here, and here is my. It's an older one. That's 2018, 2023, 2024. I don't know. My camera is not going to be able to focus on that, but it's essentially
No?
a temple endowment card, right? So I can take this and on it, I'll read it to you. It says, um, this certifies that Hayden Carroll um, of Cedar City Lodge number 35, sorry, free and accepted Masons in Cedar City, Utah, 84720, whose signature is written in the margin, is a member in good standing for the year ending December 31st, 2024, and has been a member for 6 years. So essentially, I pay my dues and then they send me this card, and that kind of validates me as a Freemason.
And was this
Um,
something that is this sort of a recent thing that Masons have, almost similar to our Temple recommend, or is this something
oh,
Masons would have had, going back
yeah.
to the 19th century?
I wish I could answer that question. I actually don't know the history of the card, of the
Yeah,
certification card. I could find
trust
out and
that.
let you know. You could put it in the notes.
No problem.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So day to day, like or what it's like to be a Mason very quickly. Technically, when I was living in Cedar City, we were only required technically to attend a stated meeting once a month. And so that was a business meeting essentially where they talk about finances and talk about upcoming events and talk about upcoming initiations that were going to happen. It was basically like, let's get together and talk about Masonic matters pertinent to our lodge. That being said, there are a lot of other meetings, right? When someone's going to receive a degree, there's always a practice or two, right? Because and I'll kind of explain, I'll show you some pictures here. It's kind of a performance that the brothers put on, that the initiate is actually put into, kind of like our temple endowment. And that's one of the major overlaps for our temple
Hmm.
endowment is we represent Adam and Eve. And in the Masonic rituals, we represent a man named Hiram Abiff, which may or may not be a biblical character, but we can talk about that. So, other than that, my lodge specifically met every Tuesday and Thursday nights. It was just like an open house for any brothers that wanted to come hang out for an hour or two, and any non-Masons who wanted to come learn about it. That was kind of the time for them to come, which I did. I went through that process. And then after I joined, I could still go to those meetings and I would just be a brother and I could talk about those who are interested, or just most of the time, no non-Masons showed up. It was just the brothers just going to hang out.
Okay.
So it's not a huge commitment. When I joined, they put me in I'll show you some positions here or the yeah, positions of the lodge. They put me in as junior deacon, which is like the bottom of the totem pole, obviously, as a brand new member. But I played a role in some initiations. And yeah, that's basically it. You kind of have a calling. It's like a calling, kind of, right? Maybe that's where Joseph got the idea,
Hmm.
or Brigham or whoever instituted callings in the church. I'm sure they had Masonic influence on them because Masons had essentially callings or roles that we would fulfill or do fulfill. So I don't
Interesting.
fulfill any role right now because obviously I don't live in Southern Utah. I'm not active in the lodge right now. So I
And
don't.
as
Mhm.
Masons, you would be initiated, through those rituals. That'll be a one-time thing because obviously
Yes.
in the temple we do proxy ordinances for the dead, so we can go through and do endowments or baptisms for
Hmm.
the dead or sealings
Hmm.
multiple times. Is this just a one-time
Hmm.
initiation experiencing the ritual?
Yes. Luckily, though, so you would receive the ritual once for yourself. You obviously don't receive it on behalf of the dead, a Masonic ritual, because right, it has nothing to do with the afterlife necessarily.
Right.
Some brothers may make connections there, but doesn't teach it that way. The luckily though, although we can't go through the initiation ourselves or on behalf of somebody else, we can participate in the initiation ourselves for another new brother coming in. So the brothers are very familiar. It's not like you go through it once and then you never see it again. Once you join, you then become part of the ritual, right? Helping administer the ritual anyway.
Oh, I see. I see. Okay.
Yep.
Kind of like a temple
So,
worker. Gotcha.
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yep. And I would say even more so overall, right? Because in the temple, we watch the video. They don't use video. And just like in the Manti Temple and before in the Salt Lake City Temple, I don't know if you've ever been to those temples. It's
Once in the
alive.
Salt Lake. Yeah, it was
Okay,
live.
yeah. So you saw the live where there were actual actors who were acting it out and talking. That's
Yeah.
what the Masons do. So yeah, it would be like that. It'd be like being a temple worker in the Salt Lake City Temple.
Okay. Cool.
So okay, does that answer that question? Do you have any other
Yeah. Yeah.
questions about? Okay,
No, I
perfect.
think that's good for the moment.
Okay, we can go through these real quick. This is the Grand Lodge of Utah. This is on, oh, is it South Temple, if I remember correctly? Maybe South Temple and like First East or something like that. Downtown. It's close to Temple Square. If you've ever gone past it. So, I have never been in this building. I didn't go in as a missionary, and I haven't been able to go up there when they're doing tours or anything like that. There actually is a video just released by Scripture Central where they actually do get a tour of this.
That's Casey
They
Griffiths, wasn't it?
Yes, he just posted that within
Yeah.
a week ago, maybe, or a little bit, not much later than a week ago. So I'm just going to show you. The next picture is not a picture of inside the Salt Lake Grand Lodge because I couldn't find a really good picture of of any lodge room in there. But here is essentially what it would look like, and I actually do have some pictures of the Massachusetts Grand Lodge that I'll show you that I saw this weekend. But this is essentially what a lodge room looks like. There you have the worshipful master, which is like the president, right? He's like the bishop or the stake president. For the Grand Lodge, it would be the Grand Worshipful Master, which is like the stake president, and then each lodge would have their own master, which is like the bishop. And he would sit in the east, which is obviously symbolic. On the left, you can kind of see the actual visual, and I'll show you some more pictures of other rooms. And then on the right, you kind of see the blueprint version, bird's eye view, where you can see where all of the positions would sit.
Hmm.
Now, if I'm being honest, I don't, because I was only in Cedar City, I don't have a great grasp on what every single position does. What I can say about all these positions is that you have the worshipful master in the east, you have the junior warden in the south, and you have the senior warden in the west. That would be like the first presidency or like the bishopric, right? They're in threes. And did the church, have presidencies, first and second counselor because of the Masons? Can't say for sure, but I'm sure
I think some of that would
there's.
have existed prior, but
Yep.
interesting.
Yep.
And one thing that is quite that stands out
Hmm.
to me, similar to the rooms in the temple, is the altar there in the middle.
Yep. Yep. You're gonna see some similarities here in a second, and there's even more than that I think your viewers will really love.
Okay.
So here is just not the greatest picture of myself, but
Mhm.
this last weekend I was able to go to the Grand Lodge of Masons of Massachusetts, chartered 1733. This is right in downtown Boston, right by Boston Commons, is a park if anyone's ever been there. So I went in and I was just a walk in. They do tours just during the daytime. So I walked in and they took us through lots of the different rooms. So I just want to show you some of the rooms that they showed me. This will be really quick. This is This is a room used for Scottish Rite, and this is a stage. It kind of looks like a culture hall stage to me. That's the first thing I thought about. So I don't know if there's any overlap there, but I'm going to turn around now. So this is the stage, and then if you turn around from where I was taking the picture, this is what you see behind you. So it's just a theater essentially. And to me, I saw the endowment room, right? I saw, and it's not men and women, it's all men obviously, but this is where, as far as I understand it, and as they explained it to me, the men who want to receive their Scottish Rite degrees, up to the 33 degrees, this is where
Mhm.
they would receive it. And there actually is a screen. That back black part is actually a LED screen where they can put different images on it. So they would receive their degrees by sitting in these chairs and watching a presentation, essentially. Is how I
They
understand
would
it.
be acting it out. They don't. You said they might be, picture
Well,
screen, but they don't tend to use a film.
I don't think so. I think the screen is for, I may be wrong. 'Cause obviously, they didn't turn the screen on or anything for us, but I think there are actors on the stage who have costumes and things like that. And I don't know the story. I don't know anything about it, but I think they use the screen as like the scenery, as far as
Right.
I
Okay.
understand. So, anyway, yeah, just kind of interesting. This is one room of the huge Grand Lodge. Here is another ritual room. I just took it because it said the Grand Lodge of Masons in Massachusetts. Here's to the, that would be to the south. This is the junior warden spot. Just kind of fun. Those pictures on the wall, those are all the grand masters of the Grand Lodge over the years. So they go back to like, what was it, 1733? I think it said. Here's a fun picture. This is Paul Revere. He was a grandmaster. I learned that as new information. Paul Revere was a grandmaster of the Boston Grand Lodge. Kind of fun. Um, okay, so we didn't talk about this yet, but you see on the bottoms, remember those two stones. You have the perfect stone here on the left with ashlar, and then you have the rough stone here on the right side. We'll talk about that in a second. That guy, Henry Price, as I understand it, was the first Grand Master of Boston and kind of seen as like the first Grand Master in the United States, as far as I understand. So he kind of holds that esteem. They hold that esteem to him. Here's another lodge room, just kind of interesting. So that's the Boston Lodge. There's some other pictures I took, but I felt those were the most relevant. This is a picture you can find online, just for those who are interested. Kind of like these are empty rooms, right? But what does it look like when the initiation process is actually happening? Here is a picture, and I think a great depiction of what the initiation process would look like. We have the initiate; they're blindfolded, knee exposed, elbow or shoulder exposed. And you have the brother, the escort, who's walking him. You have some symbols on the ground. You have the brothers participating. You have the gavel, as I can see it here in that brother's hand with the hat on. So this is I mean I can't like give you exact details, but this is a great depiction of what one of the degrees would look like. Do you have any questions about that at all before we get into the symbolism?
No, don't think so.
Okay, awesome. I put this up here because those who live in Utah are very, very familiar with the beehive, and they have it on the old flag, right? The old Utah flag and the new Utah flag. We have the beehive. But one thing that I think is fun to know for Latter-day Saints is I think you could make a strong argument that the Latter-day Saints got the symbol of the beehive from the Freemasons because the beehive plays a part in our ritual. And it's kind of the same idea that the bees each have a role, right? We each have a calling in the church. Each brother has a role to play in his society to build something, greater than ourselves,
Hmm.
whether it be the beehive or the church or your society or your lodge or your
Yeah.
marriage or
Oh,
family or whatever. So that's very
great symbolism.
very symbolic. And yeah, so anytime you're driving down the streets of Salt Lake City and see the beehive, you know that really is Masonic origin. Okay, so here's where the fun where the fun begins in my mind.
Right. Like the history and the origins of Masonry.
Yes, yes. So the best way to say it is that modern Freemasonry as we know it can be traced back to the year 1717. Now, there were probably lodges and guilds before that in England and Scotland. And I'll show you some pictures here. And we have some Masonic notes from, I think, 1599. But it was not organized. It most likely was not organized how we have it organized today, especially in the United States. So, why do I have a picture of Solomon's Temple up here? It's because not that we believe that we actually descended from Masons who built the temple necessarily. There may be some brothers who believe that. I personally do not. I think most people would say that our lore and the symbolism that we use was taken from the idea that the Masons built the temple and used specific tools. But the idea and the lore that's taught in our in the realm of Freemasonry is that these Freemasons, or the people who built this temple, I'll show you this page here, they would use particular tools during the day while they were operative masons or stonemasons to build the temple. And here are some of the tools that they would use. These are everyday Masonic tools, right? To build a building, you would use these physical tools to build a physical structure. The idea in Freemasonry is that while these can be used for a physical or operative purpose, they can also be used for a symbolic purpose. So the idea is that they would use the tools during the day, and then in the evening times, the lore or myth is that they would meet together secretively, and they would use the tools like we do today in Masonry to teach each other moral lessons, essentially, or to use allegory or basically symbolism. So that, in a nutshell, is what Freemasonry is. It's talking about how Solomon's temple, that the stones placed in Solomon's temple were so perfect, it was as if the hand of God himself had made those stones to be placed into his temple. And then we as Freemasons say, how can we use these tools symbolically to live our lives, to be shaped? And I'll show you the ashlar stones here in a second. How can we be shaped to become that stone, to be placed in God's temple, if you will, or to be placed with a purpose? Here is a book that you definitely are familiar with, and your viewers are probably familiar with, by Richard Bushman, Rough Stone Rolling. This comes from this subtitle that Richard Bushman used comes from as far as I understand it, a quote from Joseph, where Joseph said, "I am a rough stone. I desire the learning of wisdom in heaven alone." The idea of a rough stone is a Masonic, is I'm 99.9% sure Joseph is referring to Masonic symbolism here. And here's why.
That's so interesting. I never realized that before, the context of that quote.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Because in Freemasonry, we are taught that we are a rough stone. You see those on the outer edge. And then we are using those tools or moral principles to shed the dross, or we're being shaped by the great architect, right? Do you see that Masonic symbol? And actually, this Fossil Bluff stone here, luckily, I actually have one. I was given it as a gift actually by my parents. I don't know if you can see it. I don't know how well it's going to focus, but it's essentially what you're seeing on the screen. And so it's kind of a paperweight essentially, but
see the compass and the square and the G. What does the G represent? Is that representative of like God or believing in a deity?
God, great architect. Yes. Yeah. Okay. It's essentially the higher power that's shaping us, right? As we submit to that higher power and use the tools, right? As the operative Masons, let me go back to this. As the operative Masons would use these tools, we are also using the tools in a symbolic purpose to shape our lives. That's essentially what Freemasonry is we get together and we talk. And some people would say, well, that's pretty boring. And it's like, depends on the individual. Like, I love this, right? And I think a lot of Latter-day Saints love this would love this because that's what the gospel is. We're seeking to be perfected through Christ, right? Masonry is the same thing, but without the like what's the word, like divine. I mean, there's divinity, but it's more temporal. It's more about let's be good here on earth, rather than talking about
replacing your discipleship or activity in the church, but there sort of like facilitate and help enhance it. Kind of makes me think of the scripture about like being anxiously engaged in a cause, and it seems like it's good moral values and a good cause that they're trying to engage in.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is, and we're simply using the tools and the lore of the ancient stonemasons to now apply it to us today. That's all it is, and it's really cool. Like, I'm not soliciting people joining necessarily.
I wonder if you're going to get some people wanting to join Freemasonry as a result of this interview.
If people are interested, you can give them my information. I'd love to talk to them about it. It's one of the coolest things in the world. Now, would I abandon the church to do more full-time Masonry? Absolutely not, right? The temple is way more cool than Freemasonry, but Freemasonry is excellent. And it's just, although not necessary, and I would never say that Freemasonry, that you have to be a Freemason to understand the temple fully. I would never say anything like that, because I think there were prophets who were not Freemasons who understood the temple much more than any other Freemason who ever lived. So anyway, okay. Carthage. This is just kind of a cool little history plug here. Here is DNC 135. We don't have to read through the whole thing. This is, I believe it was written by John Taylor, actually. He gives the account of Joseph and Hiram being shot and gives the date and the time and kind of the mob and things like that. If you look at the
Was
last
him and
pair,
Brigham that were in the mob that killed Joseph? No, I'm
well,
just
you know, we could have a conversation about that. Yeah, that
Won't
blows
go
my
there.
mind. The history. Well, I won't speak on that. Look at the last paragraph. Uh, John Taylor said, Hiram was shot first and fell calmly, exclaiming, I'm a dead man. Joseph then leaped from the window and was shot dead in an attempt, exclaiming, Oh Lord, my God. Now, the reason I'm showing you this is because it relates to Freemasonry. I cannot tell you with my own words why this is important, but I have a quote from Heber C. Kimball that kind of explains why this is relevant to this conversation. So, oh Lord, my God, is what Joseph said as he died.
Mm.
Heber C. Kimball said, Masons, it is said, were even among the mob that murdered Joseph and Hiram at Carthage jail. Joseph, leaping from the fatal window, gave the Masonic signal of distress, the answer with the roar of his murderers' muskets. So I hope you can put two and two together, that there's something special about what Joseph was saying or about to say, that he was maybe asking for some help from those in the
Yeah.
crowd.
It's like the Masonic sign of distress, isn't it? And if there are some Masons in the
Yeah.
mob, we might have been hoping that they might have tried to defend or
Mm-hmm.
stop the shooting. I suppose somebody else could interpret that's probably most likely what he was doing. Somebody else
Mm-hmm.
might just think, well, maybe he could have just been saying a
Mm-hmm.
prayer to God, but most likely knowing this context,
Yeah.
he would likely doing the Masonic call of distress.
Yeah, and I can obviously I can't confirm or deny that. That's one of the things that I wouldn't be able to say like absolutely yes or no. But
Yeah,
that's
difficult
why I
by
have
history.
that's why I have Heber C. Kimball kind of spilling the beans, if you will.
Yeah, but likely interpretation.
Yep. Okay, so that's kind of the overview of what Freemasonry is and how it kind of connects to the church. The
Hmm.
rest of the presentation is talking about the critics' claims and kind of my response to them. So, do you have any questions? Do you want to go over anything else before we jump into that, or should we dive right in?
No, I think that's good because I think you'll probably address this in the critics section because I know the main claim that I would make is one the similarities between both rituals.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you have this in some slides, but it appears that Joseph Smith and some of the early followers, early leaders believed that Freemasonry was some sort of like apostatized or maybe corrupted sort of ancient endowment. Now,
Mm-hmm.
from what I've researched, I don't see Joseph making any specific claims to Solomon's temple, but
Mm-hmm.
that these things were had anciently from some of the patriarchs or even, Jesus and
Yeah.
his apostles. But many of them believe that this went back to Solomon's temple at that time, sort of like this myth of masonry.
Yep.
As you mentioned, scholars can't find like a direct line or
Mm-hmm.
tie between Solomon's temple and
Yeah.
Freemasonry. So critics would then tend to argue this then shows that Freemasonry is sort of a modern creation coming from medieval times.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, the temple endowment is then modern and a plagiarism.
Sure. I will say this. I wish I had the quote up on the screen. Actually, when I was on a mission, I thought I remember reading a quote from Joseph where he said that the temple, maybe it was him or Brigham, someone look it up for us, but like the quote basically said the Freemasons had the apostate endowment is at least a quote from an early church leader that I
Yeah,
remember
definitely
reading.
when the early church leaders said that, I could probably,
Yeah.
I think I have a list somewhere, but
Yeah.
you keep going. I'll
Yeah.
let you know who said that.
Sure. So let's just go through this, and I'm sure questions will come up as we go. I've done my best to steel man the critics' claim, basically saying what they would say, and it's kind of a reiteration with what you said. Now, so I have some premises, and then I have a conclusion that kind of the atheist or the evangelical will come to, depending on their worldview. So the first premise that I think most people would agree to who are critical of the church. Or of Joseph is that the aspects of Masonic rituals are unique to the Freemasons and were created by them. That's a premise that I found most people assume. So
Yes,
we're so
yes.
so we're going to talk about that here in a second. The second one that people would say, and this one is true, I'll give that up.
Yeah.
Joseph became a Master
Actually,
Mason in March, and you said what, 15th and 16th of
yes,
March,
that's what I have. Yeah.
and then a few months later in May, he introduces the saints to the idea of the need for a temple and an endowment. That one, I think most people believe, but we're going to talk about why that's actually not true. Number four, the similarities. There are similarities between Masonic rituals and the Temple Endowment. That one is obviously true. The extent of that is highly debatable. And having been through both myself, well, I'll give you my conclusion here at the end. Here is what I think. When you add all those things together, especially when you're an ex-Mormon or an evangelical, this is probably the conclusion that people will come to. Joseph was influenced by Freemasons. He stole their unique ceremony and used it as his own to create the temple endowment, which proves him as a false prophet if you're an evangelical, or a con man if you are an atheist.
Yeah, sure.
So,
Provides a naturalistic
yep,
explanation, you could say.
sure. And if anyone feels like these premises are not fair, then we can have a conversation about that. But that ultimately is a conclusion that people use when they're talking about, when they mention Freemasonry in the temple. That's ultimately what they're talking about, is Joseph stole it, or some reiteration of that.
And what I would do to steelman, or to make the
Yeah,
critics' argument stronger, as
sure.
I've been doing my own research, I think just purely trying to say that he could have taken everything from Masonry and that produced the Temple Endowment, I think a better argument. I still don't think it fully explains everything in our Temple Endowment, or things that you might see as connections to ancient temple rites. But I think a stronger argument is he was also drawing upon things in the Bible, particularly like,
Oh, sure.
say, washings, anointings in the Book of Exodus.
Yes.
Combining that, that's maybe a stronger argument a critic could make.
Yeah, and I should add that in. That's a great way to say it. That a combination of that, definitely. Okay, so we're going to focus on premise number one, where most people would say that, and the reason why people say this or believe premise number one is because they just don't know the history. So I'd just like to give a brief history of this question. Where and when did modern Freemasonry begin? Now, I kind of gave a date of 1717, but the oldest Masonic Masons that we actually have were found in Scotland. And here's a picture of it. Yeah, maybe not. It's
Not
I
too
don't know how
far
to.
from where I'm from.
Yeah, and how do you say that? I don't. How do you say that, the name of that city?
Is that Edinburgh? Or
Yeah,
which
yeah.
one? Which one?
It starts with an E, Edinburgh.
Yeah, Edinburgh.
Okay, Edinburgh. So this, from what I understand, is probably the oldest, and many people would claim the oldest lodge that participated, or that Masons participated in. And it was in the 1400s. It was in the 15th century. Now, was it organized, and did they have a Grand Lodge and things like that? No. And so, and actually, I talked to one of the Masons in Boston this past weekend, and I asked him, I said, where do you think the Masonry started? And he said, well, to be fair, we would have to say 1717 is the Americanized, if you will, Masonry that we have today. He says there may have been other people meeting and doing other things, but we don't really have a lot of information on them. So there are remnants, I would call it, or potential origins here in this part of the world, in England and in Europe. And this may be, and probably was, one of the buildings used in the earlier than 1717. Now I can't say much more than that. Okay, so here's where I think things get really interesting, and I hope you understand that I created this presentation. This is a connection that I have personally made, and people may disagree with me, and that's fine. We can talk about it, but let me ask this question, and we'll kind of get into what I'm getting at. If there was one organization prominent in the 13th to 16th century Europe that might have remnants of the temple, I mean, meaning our temple, truths and practices retained from the time of Christ and his apostles, what organization might that be? Now, I don't know if you if you looked at the slides before when I sent them to you, and I don't know if you want to answer that question.
I glossed through them.
Okay, so you probably know the answer to this question, or what I'm getting at. Today I'd like to show you some really interesting, and I'm not making any claims necessarily. I just want to show you some things and that I think are interesting in regards to the temple endowment as it's related to the Catholic Church. So one of the theories that I've heard amongst Masons, and more so Latter-day Saint Masons, is that the Catholic Church, claiming its authority from Peter, if Peter had the original endowment, that there are reasons why the Catholic Church would have remnants of temple practices that, although as Latter-day Saints we would say apostatized, or that, if they have any of it, I don't think they do any temple endowments today or things like that. But it does look, interesting from what I'm about to show you, that they potentially had some temple truths, and I'll leave it at that. But let me just show you some pictures here. This is Vatican City. If anyone's ever been to Rome, this is Peter's Basilica, where if I'm not misunderstanding, I think Peter's buried there under Peter's Basilica. I may be wrong there, but
Not too sure
that's
on
what.
that. I visited there last year.
Okay, yeah.
Amazing city.
Okay, yeah, yeah. I've never been there. I'd love to go one of these days. But here's it filled up. I don't know. I'm sure this has something to do with the Catholic Church or a ceremony they were performing. Maybe it was a new pope or something. I don't know. Here's a bird's eye view. So you can see kind of like that circle, like courtyard. Here's a bird's eye view in Pierce Basilica on the top. You can already see the symbolism of the building shape. I don't know if you can see that, but I'm going to show you. I'm going to move it over here. So I'm going to the top part of the actual building. And I'm going to give you a blueprint or schematics version of this, but go ahead and take a look at some of the shapes of the building as I change it to that. And this is, so this is Peter's Basilica. This is the start of some overlap that we start to have with the Catholic Church. And what I'm essentially doing in this presentation is, while I'm not making any certain claims, I'm just showing that symbols go deeper than the Masons, is what I'm trying to show.
Right. It
So
predates them.
yes. And by the way, for those watching, Masons, you talk to any Masons, we don't claim that we created any of the symbols that we're using. Most of them are stolen or borrowed from other places. And to be frank, I'm suggesting that maybe some of those symbols were borrowed or stolen from the Catholic Church to then be used in Masonry, which then were used in Latter-day Saintism. So here are some of the symbols that we'll see. You have a square, which for us represents the four corners of the earth, and amongst other things. And you have the compass or the circle, right? Which for Latter-day Saints typically would represent heaven or eternity or one eternal round. And then another symbol the first symbol people probably saw was the cross. Now, is this intentional? I can't say for sure, but I mean, I want to say yes. If anyone's Catholic, watching here can tell us a little bit about Peter's Basilica. Tell us, is this intentional, at least for the cross or things like that? But here's some symbols for us, right? So Latter-day Saint symbol, we have the square or the square and the circle. And if you put them together and you go to Temple Square in Salt Lake City, you will see this symbol all over the place, which represents where heaven meets earth, right? This is a symbol of the temple where eternity circle meets the earth, the square. Some other just cool things in the celestial rooms. Often, if not every time, you will see circle tables with square shaped, not like furniture forming a square essentially around it. So I just went to the Boston Temple and it was the same thing in there. I think the top left is Gilbert. I can't remember. Some people may recognize some of these rooms. Okay, so you have the Catholic Church using the square and the circle. You have the Latter-day Saints using it. The Masons also use it, right? That's the square, the tool called the square, which helps you to make right angles. And you have the compass, which helps you to make a perfect circle. And you put those together and you get the Masonic symbol, essentially. Okay. So
I've
back to
also seen in ancient art and ancient cultures, Asia and early Christians, that the compass and the square was also, common symbols as well. So they go back anciently.
Totally. Yep. And so, the whole part of this part of the presentation is to show that the Masons are they don't have a monopoly on the symbols or the origin of the symbols, right? Okay. Next one, kind of an interesting thing here, some Catholic priests. And I want to compare that to what a Jewish high priest would look like anciently. And if you've been endowed, I want you to ask yourself, have you ever worn clothing like this before? So this is not an LDS drawing. It's probably a Jewish person potentially painting or drawing this. I just want to point to this part where it says the ephod or the ephod. It's an apron-like garment held together by a girdle fastened at the front. Now, Latter-day Saints, we don't wear these exact robes or like the stones like anciently. You can look in the Book of Exodus or other biblical books or I guess it would be the first 5 books of Moses when they're doing temple worship. But you see the hat there, right? Does that hat look familiar to us? And what does it represent? It represents a crown. The purpose of this is just to show that when you put those temple robes on, it's not just something Joseph made up, right? It has some very symbolic ancient meaning. And it goes further than this. These things all represent something, right? So just kind of fun.
As well, after they're washed and anointed, so before that they receive these priestly robes, I believe they have an undergarment as well.
Oh, okay, yeah.
That they would wear. which
Okay,
I
yeah.
don't believe that, well, you would know, that doesn't exist in Freemasonry. I don't believe you have some sort of an undergarment, or do you?
Not that we wear every day, but during the initiation process, we do wear a particular garb
Okay,
or clothing, but then we take it off after the ritual. So yeah,
gotcha.
I wear my temple garments right every single day.
Hmm.
So yeah, great question. Okay, here's just really quick. This is just more Catholic and temple overlap to show the symbolism here. So we're taking a kind of a step back from Freemasonry just for a second, but it's for a good purpose. These are found. I guess hieroglyphs or these paintings on the wall are found in the catacombs under Rome, right where they buried the bodies. And this one in particular is a woman with a veil over her face, with her arms in the air, wearing robe-like clothing. I mean, that probably should look familiar, at least similar to those who have been endowed. Now, am I claiming that this is a temple endowment ceremony being recorded on the wall? Not necessarily, but it's just interesting. Hugh Nibley wrote this article that you can find online called Early Christian Prayer Circles, and he said that the prayer circle, um, just as a mode of prayer, dated at least to the early third century, which is 200 AD. So just some interesting things. And this is found in Rome. Okay.
Yeah, I know I read an article by Jeff Bradshaw and he nobly talked about this like early Christian prayer circles in some
Yep.
early Christian texts and
Yep.
documents which haven't been, canonized in the Bible, but about Jesus,
Hmm.
instituting prayer circles among the disciples as well, which is
Hmm.
quite interesting because that would
Yep.
be one aspect you could say of the temple endowment which Joseph wouldn't have gotten from Masonry. I don't believe that's an element in Masonry or something he would have gotten from the Bible, but that's something which
Yeah.
is in our temple endowment.
Yeah, I will say this. There's not really a prayer circle in the Masonic rituals. There is a part where the brothers get in a circle, but they're not really saying a prayer. They're
Mm,
having a conversation. So anyway, yeah, I would agree with you. I think it dates back farther than Masonic rituals for sure.
mhm,
Okay, here is this is really cool. Here is a cathedral in France. I wish I could remember which city it is. I could probably look it up for you, but this is in a cathedral, and this is like a sculpture up on the wall. And if you look at the center, I mean, there's lots of things going on here, lots of people and things like that. If you look at the very center, you see the Savior, and you see him positioning his arms in a particular way. I'm going to zoom in here for us. But again, this is the Catholic Church producing art. Whoever sculpted this, maybe it was even more than one person, that looks familiar to Latter-day Saints, right? And this is part. This is edging on the side of sacred, right? So you and I can't really talk about this, but if you're an endowed Latter-day Saint, this should look familiar to you. And this is in the
mm.
Catholic Church. Okay, this one is just kind of fun. I'm not making anything here. I don't know anything about this culture and this statue. I was actually scrolling on Reddit years ago, and in a non-LDS subreddit, I can't remember what it was, and I saw this picture here, and they said it was an ancient artifact from Guatemala, and it dated from 600 to 900 AD. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like I mean, if the Book of Mormon occurred in South America, I don't know what model you hold to, but if it happened in South America, Central America, or whatever, that's kind of cool. And now I'm not saying anything particular about the way his hands are positioned. I mean, but who knows? Just
I
kind of
know I've
fun.
seen similar gestures to that from Buddhist
Hmm.
statues as well
Yes. Yep.
in Asia. So it's very clear that some of these signs or some of these symbols, again,
Yes.
not just exclusive or originated with
Totally.
Masonry, but go back anciently in different culture, which is it's fascinating.
Yes. Yep. And you said it perfectly. Like I don't even have to say anything. That's exactly what I'm trying to get at. Okay, here's just kind of fun. This is Hugh Nibley again, his Temple in the Cosmos book. You see here he has some depictions of individuals wearing robes, and you see the middle figure with his arms and the figure on the right with his arms. This is ancient. Let me see what he says here. These are, I thought there was some locations here. Okay, we have Italy, we have France, right? So you have some places around the world where these statues are depicting particular signs that look familiar to Latter-day Saints. So this is I love this because it shows Latter-day Saints who don't know anything about the temple endowment. Maybe you were just endowed, or maybe you were endowed a long time ago and you just have been going to the temple, but you haven't really thought about, like, think about the signs that you're making. Like, they have symbolic meaning. And this is just to show, and I think Hugh Nibley understood that, as you've said, that these symbols maybe can be used around the world. Now, did these individuals, these who created these statues in this book or that are depicted in this book, did they think about it the same way we do? Not necessarily, but just
Right.
kind of interesting that signs and symbols, tokens have been used all over the place.
Yeah, it kind of begs the question, did it come from some sort of original source? Because of course they're
Yes.
being repurposed and used according to their own
Yep.
ceremonies and their own
Yep.
theology or views of God
Yep.
or the afterlife. But there's some similarities in these signs, in these symbols, and even in some of the ritual clothing being used as well.
Yes. And without making any claims, like I would not have a problem with somebody believing that the endowment started with Adam and Eve and it went from there, and some of it was kept, through the apostasy, and some of it was distorted, and some of it was used, and some of it was passed on. That's, I mean, we don't have any much information on that, but that's one way a Latter-day Saint could look at it,
To
which I
interpret
think would
this,
I think
yeah,
could be
not
fine. Yeah.
something that we can necessarily prove, but
No, no, absolutely not. Okay, here's something really cool. I've done this was sent to me by a Latter-day Saint friend. He was actually my bishop. His name's Alma Allred. You might actually know him. He has a little bit of an
oh yeah,
online presence.
yeah,
He's
yeah.
serving a mission in Rome, where he's serving as a temple worker, him and his wife in Rome right now. He sent this to me years ago, and I asked him if he could find he photocopied this at the University of Utah Library. And I said, "Do you know what book this was?" And he couldn't remember and he didn't take a picture of the cover. So I have to find this. But here is a book, and you can see here it actually has the citation. See, it has its three and then quoted by P. Paris. That might actually be a better source. I think I've actually looked that up and couldn't find the exact source there, the actual book or whatever it was. But I'm just going to read through this, and Latter-day Saints who have been through the temple initiatory, just consider what is being said here. This is in a Catholic liturgy or ritual book. I sign your forehead in the name of the Father, Son, of the Holy Spirit, that you may, so that you may be a Christian. I sign your eyes that you may see the glory of God. I sign your ears that you may hear the voice of the Lord. I sign your nostrils so that you may breathe the fragrance of Christ. I sign your lips so that you may speak the words of life. I sign your heart so that you may believe in the Holy Trinity. I sign your shoulders so that you may bear the yoke of Christ's service. I sign your whole body in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, so that you may live forever and ever. If that doesn't sound familiar, you probably have not been through initiatory in a very long time.
And
But
I found a very similar one here in some
mhm.
research that I've been doing from Cyril of Jerusalem, an early
Okay.
Christian father and theologian. This
Mhm.
is dated 348 to 350 AD. I'll
Okay.
just quote, it's very similar to what you quote here. So
Yeah, please.
I thought I get up. So he's talking about, as soon then as you entered, you put off your tunic. And this was an image of putting off the old man with his deeds.
Mhm.
Having stripped yourselves, you were naked. In this also imitating Christ, who was stripped naked on the cross. For truly ye bore the likeness of the first form man, Adam, who was naked in the garden and was not ashamed. And then he goes on to say, which ointment is symbolically applied to your forehead and your other senses. You were first anointed on the forehead, then on your ears, nostrils, afterwards on your breast. And then he talks after about receiving the holy baptism and a mystical chrism. And I'll put the
Mhm.
slide up on that for my listeners after so they can read it, but that's sort of in line with what
Mhm.
you're saying, which is, very similar to our washing and anointing.
Yep. And so, cool thing is, I think a critic would be hard pressed to say that Joseph like stole this. And this is not found in the Bible, as far as I understand. There's no like book in Exodus where it says like this. So
Yeah,
I'd be
not
interested.
specifically, because it does talk about Aaron and his priests being
Hmm.
washed and anointed, but it,
Hmm.
it doesn't go into these, specifics about the different parts of the
Yeah.
body, both
No.
from that source and from Cyril of Jerusalem, which is
Yeah.
quite interesting.
I think a critic would probably say, well, Joseph, he had Catholic influence, or he had another resource where he found this and he just included it. I think you'd be hard pressed to prove that or show any evidence of it whatsoever that Joseph had access to records such as this.
Yeah, I'm not too aware of specifically if it talks about in the Book of Exodus those different parts of the body being, what,
Yeah.
like being anointed. I'd have to double check
No,
that, but I don't think it does.
no. I think you'd be hard pressed to find it. Okay, here is a mural. This is kind of the last part of the Catholic symbolism here. Here's a mural that Alma Allred actually took while he was in Ravenna, Italy, which is about, I think, 4 hours north of Rome, just visiting, right, on vacation. And he's the one who actually took this picture, and he just was so intrigued by it because you can kind of see some similarities between us, between our temple veil and this veil, if you will, on this wall. Now, that's the first part, but there's a cooler part or a more fascinating part for Latter-day Saints as you start to look closer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom into the left side, those curtains over there, those veils on the left side. And I want to ask you and your listeners if you see anything coming out from behind the curtains.
I
You
see a
see that?
hand.
Yeah. Do you see that? You see hands coming out from behind the curtain. So as a Latter-day Saint, that means something to us. Now, did it mean exactly the same to the Catholic Church when they painted this or made this? I don't know for sure, but it's really interesting that you would have the Catholic Church creating this veil-like mural with hands coming out from behind the curtain. So it's just to show that the symbolism of our temple can be found in other places outside of Masonry. That's all
Right.
I'm saying.
Mhm.
That's the point. So anyway, I think that's Pope Francis, and give him the thumbs up here to Freemasonry. Now, funny enough, there's actually been a ban on Catholics joining Freemasonry. I think in the 1700s, actually. I'd have to look at the exact date. They were banned by one of the popes from joining. I think that still applies today. Like, no Catholics are supposed to join the Freemasons.
Mm.
Okay, so to answer the question, are aspects of temple worship only found in Freemasonry? The answer is absolutely not. So when we look at premise number one, the aspects of the Masonic ritual are unique to the Freemasons. The answer is just no, right? No, Masons don't claim that. Joseph didn't claim that. They are much more ancient, which is actually kind of cool for us, right? Because we claim that the temple is ancient. So kind of cool. So just to move forward here, the last part of the presentation is looking at premise number 3, and then I'll give you my conclusion here, which is that in May 1842, Joseph introduces the saints to the need for a temple endowment. So the idea is like Joseph became a Mason, and then very quickly he's like, "Oh, we need to do this. Like this is something that's good." Like almost like he got the idea from them. But I'd like to kind of quash that idea by asking this question: how long had the Lord been promising the saints temple blessings and an endowment? So here's the end of the presentation. It's simply a timeline of each time the saints are interacting with the Lord in regards to a temple. So remember, Joseph was made in a Mason. You'll see it on the timeline in 1842. But let's start here. In 1830, the church is restored. So Joseph is already engaged in being a prophet. In 1830 of that same, or in December of that same year, Christ is mentioning the need for a temple for the first time in modern scripture. So that's kind of a cool one. You might want to highlight that in your own scriptures. D&C 636:8. The first time the Lord says, "I want you to build a house," or I think he uses the word temple.
Actually, I
So
didn't realize it was that early. Because although
yeah.
it's section 36, a lot of the early revelations were received really in those first couple of years of the church
Yes.
being reorganized.
Yes. So realize that Joseph had already we'll say it like this: from a Latter-day Saint perspective, the Lord was telling him about the temple like immediately as the church was restored. A critic would say he was talking about it, or he came up with the idea early on, right? We would see this revelation.
Mm.
So January 2nd, so a month later, less than a month later, Christ mentions again the temple and saints being endowed. He uses the word endowed. Okay, so that's important. See, Joseph Smith is not a Mason here. He may have family members or friends are, but they are not allowed to reveal any secrets to him regarding Masonry. He's not a Mason, so they're not going to be telling him about the rituals. But this is 1831. The Lord says, "I want to endow you with power." Okay. 1840 or 1831 February, the next month, he continues to focus on the temple and eventually to build a temple. And you can go look at these verses. They're really actually cool. I'll tell you this, creating this timeline, like it took me 3 or 4 hours to do it because I was trying to get all the dates right and set up the format. It was probably one of the most spiritual experiences I've ever had, was remembering the saints and remembering their sacrifice. So if anyone's interested in having a really cool study, go do what I've done here on your own and you'll be blessed by it. So that same month, Christ again mentions endowing the saints. So Joseph's thinking about an endowment way before Freemasonry. The Lord commands them to build a temple in Kirtland, Ohio in 1833. So that's 2 years later. That's in June and August. He gives them instruction to build it, the measurements and things like that. The Lord reminds the saints they must receive an endowment. So this is 1834, the next year. So constantly, almost every year, I guess besides 1832, the Lord's mentioning in scripture that we have today, the temple and the endowment. Okay, 1836, in the Kirtland Temple, as I understand it, the initiatory ordinance is introduced to the brethren.
Yes.
Okay, which is the preparatory ordinance. It's the beginning of the endowment. It's almost like they were, because they didn't have the endowment like we have it today. Even the longer one, the version that they have, ours is a lot shorter because we have the technology. Their endowment was probably 8 hours long or whatever it was. But it's like they received this, and then the Lord said, "I have more for you." This is just the beginning. This is the prep. This is to prepare you. Now, for us, we go to the when we get endowed, we get initiatory on the same day, right? Like I think you and I both, right? We you go to the temple, you go through the initiatory, you receive your temple garment, and then you get endowed on the same day. For them, it was like, okay, you're going to get initiatory, but I'm not going to give you the endowment quite yet, but you should wait for it. Um, Here is the dedication of the Kirtland Temple and the administration of the initiatory ordinance to all the adult members in 1836 March. So they had the initiatory, but that's all they had as far as temple rituals. I really love this scripture. I'd encourage people to go look at this, D&C 110, 9 and 10. The Lord mentions greater temple blessings are in store for the saints. And this is 1836. So Joseph's still not a Mason. He doesn't know Masonic secrets at this point. But the Lord says, I have more for you.
Mm.
Okay, so they have the temple already. They have the initiatory already. And he says there's going to be some more in a little bit. Okay, and continue just really quickly. The saints are forced to leave Kirtland and they go to Missouri. You have Joseph in Liberty Jail. The extermination order, so they go to Nauvoo. That's just kind of relevant information to this. Saints are eager to build another temple and to receive the Lord's promised endowment. A committee was formed in 1840. Joseph Smith, this is kind of irrelevant, kind of cool. Joseph Smith suggests there's a place of safety for the saints away in the Rocky Mountains. The Lord gives in 1841, January, a revelation to the saints to build a Nauvoo temple, instructs them to perform washing and anointings in it. In February of 1841, the temple construction begins. And then just over a year later, Joseph joins the Free and Accepted Masons of Illinois. So you already have these temple doctrines and this endowment doctrine around before he becomes Mason. Now, here's essentially what happens, and I'll give this to you in the conclusion in the next 2 slides or so.
Can I add one wee thing? This was something that
Yes, yeah,
Jack Bradshaw highlighted to me, which I found really enlightening and illuminating. He showed the Book of Moses, which is
yeah,
sort of when Joseph was
yes,
doing his translation of the Bible,
yeah,
that revelatory expansion. But he
mm-hmm,
showed that not so much like directly teaching these principles, but they are alluded to or found throughout the narrative
mm-hmm,
in the Book of Moses. And
yes,
many of what later becomes sort of covenant things that we covenant to
mm-hmm,
in the temple, talk about like the gospel, the law of sacrifice, the law of consecration, chastity.
mm-hmm,
It was really enlightening because he showed how so many of those things are found in the Book of Moses, which I guess you could take either interpretation. From obviously a believer standpoint, we believe that was
mm-hmm,
revelation that Joe Smith received, which then
mm-hmm,
later maybe constitutes some of the doctrine or the covenants to go in the
yep,
endowments. Obviously, a critic might think, well, he was just combining his own sort of theological or doctrinal views, shall we say, with the
mm-hmm,
Masonic ritual. But you can definitely see some seeds to what later goes in the temple endowment
yes.
in some of his early revelations or scriptural productions.
100%. And just to clarify, it looks like I'm looking at my gospel library app right now. It looks like the Book of Moses was received June 1830 to February 1831.
Very
So
early.
very early. I mean, the church was restored in April. So 2 months after that, the Book of Moses is starting to be revealed. And thanks for highlighting those elements. That's really cool.
Yeah. Kudos to
Okay.
Jeff Bradshaw for pointing that out to me. I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah. And I should add that to this presentation. That's a great piece of information. Okay, so one thing I want to just say about this, March 15th. Oh, look, I do have the date on there. March 15th, 1842, he becomes a Freemason. From a faithful perspective, and the critics will see this differently, obviously. Here, if you want to know, as somebody who has been through the temple endowment, the initiatory and the endowment, and has been through the 3 degrees of Blue Lodge Masonry, entered apprentice, fellow craft, and master Mason, my understanding after receiving all that and doing all my other study and things like that over the past 6 years or so, it seems to me that Joseph knew that an endowment needed to come, obviously, from the scripture he was receiving. From the revelation, the Lord was clear. I have more for you after this initiatory I've already given you. It's going to be in the temple. And I think Joseph maybe knew some of the information regarding Adam and Eve and the plan of salvation story and the covenants a little bit, like you said, from the Book of Moses, potentially.
Mhm.
But I think where he struggled was how to effectively teach the Latter-day Saints about these divine principles and truths. And in my opinion, and people may disagree with me, critics may disagree with me, I think it's obvious that when he received the ritual, the Masonic rituals for himself, because his brother was already a Mason, his father was, and I don't know how much they would have told him about it, probably nothing, out of fear of breaking their oath. I think it's clear that he saw a very effective way to teach people, and it was through drama. It was through it was through inserting an individual into a play and teaching them a story that would help them learn divine or moral, for Masons, moral truths, and for Latter-day Saints divine truths, which is also moral truth. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you might call that the catalyst theory, and I'll talk about that here in a second.
Yeah, almost Masonry was a way for him to present the endowment through
Yes.
a ritual drama.
Yes.
And again, we'll maybe come to this more at the end, because some people like to differentiate between the endowment, like the covenant,
Yes.
and the doctrine, versus like the presentation, like the teaching method, and
Yes.
that more influenced by Masonry, and that being the sort of like teaching style that Joseph
Yes.
adopted.
And I would 100% agree with that. Anthony Sweat, you may have seen his videos on the temple. That's one of them. There's a difference between the endowment, which is what the Lord was talking about. He says, I have an endowment for you, endowment of power. And then there's the presentation of that endowment. How do I present? Joseph may be thinking to himself, how do I present what the Lord wants to give to his saints? And they're going to receive it through ordinance, and they're going to receive it through covenant. Now, that being said, there are critics of the church, Doctrine of Christ movement especially, who have a huge issue. Fundamentalists have an issue, like current modern LDS fundamentalist polygamists have an issue with the endowment changing. But I think the simple answer to that is that the presentation of the endowment has changed wildly since Adam and Eve. Like one of the funny things you can ask a fundamentalist, if they are like, "Oh, you guys are changing the endowment," it's like, okay, well, are you living the original endowment? And if kind of as a funny joke, and actually Almer Allred told me that he actually talked to a fundamentalist. He asked him this question. The guy said, "I can't be a member of your church because you don't have the original endowment, and we do as a fundamentalist." Whether he was with the Allred group or in the group of friends, that's a whole other conversation. But Allred said, "Oh, you have the original endowment?" And the guy said, "Yeah, we do." And he said, "Oh, can I please see your coat of skins?" And the guy said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Well, the original endowment was Adam and Eve got a coat of skins. So where's your coat of skins?" And essentially to prove the point that the presentation of the endowment that Adam and Eve received, if they received it, and I believe they did, is not the same that we have today. And guess what? That's okay. The presentation of the endowment is actually not the important part. The important part is the endowment itself, which is making covenants with God. And I think it's fair to say that those have stayed the same, at least when performed by proper authority throughout history. The presentation, I think, has changed quite a bit. Even since I received my endowment in 2013, it has changed. Not a lot, but it has changed a little bit, which I'm totally okay with and would expect considering we received modern revelation, or President Nelson does, concerning the church. So,
okay. So I have a few questions that go through my mind. I'm going to ask this critical question more towards the end, because I often like to think what a critic might think. What would you say are specific similarities between a Masonic and our own endowment ceremony, without maybe going into specific things that we're not going to convey as Latter-day Saints? Sure. But what would be some very similar things that you acknowledge, okay, just for some clarification? Yes. And then what would you say are some different things between the two ceremonies?
Yeah, great question. So for similarities, there are tokens, right, or grips that we would use in Freemasonry. There are particular passwords that we would use and signs, right? There's overlap there in regards to like the idea of those things. Now, are the signs identical? No, right? Are the grips identical? No. But there's definitely some overlap in using those, right? Now, I've had this conversation with friends of mine in the past. I don't think the church has an official stance on whether or not the tokens that we receive in the temple are literal, right? I'm more of the mindset that everything in the temple is symbolic of Jesus Christ. Now, are we actually going to have to use the tokens to get into to receive our exaltation? I don't know if I should say this, but like, I don't believe so. I think it's symbolic of something else. I think the tokens and signs and names and things like that are pointing us to something greater,
Hmm.
right? They're
Okay.
symbols, they are physical symbols of a greater truth. Now, the Freemasons don't view it like that. The Freemasons view it like, oh, you need to know this handshake so I can identify you as a Mason. Obviously, Latter-day Saints, right? When I go shake your hand and when I meet you in the future, Stephen, you and I aren't going to, we're going to shake hands. We're not going to like give you a temple token to know that you're an endowed member. That's not what we use those for. We use them as teaching tools to receive greater truths. Now,
Hmm.
could I be wrong? Sure, and I'm willing to be corrected by an authoritative source, but that's some of the similarities. The biggest similarity that I already mentioned is the presentation. It's a play, it's a drama, it's being acted out. It's a story about a man named Hiram Abiff. I wouldn't encourage anyone to go look at the details of that ritual, just like I wouldn't encourage anyone to look up the endowment or videos of the endowment. But you can learn about Hiram Abiff and learn some things about him. He was a Freemason. He was a Master Mason. He was killed. In the lore, he's killed because somebody wants to learn the secrets of a Master Mason, and he doesn't give that up. So he's killed. The initiate actually plays the role of Hiram Abiff, and essentially, and kind of like the lecture at the veil, right? After the endowment's over in the temple, they explain the marks on the veil and things like that. There's also a part of the Masonic ritual. It's actually not part of the ritual. It's actually after. It's called the lecture, where they explain basically what you saw. We're going to explain now because we understand that you're not going to be able to pick up on all of it. But let us explain kind of what you just saw, and let us teach you the moral principles and the tools. Let us show you the tools. Each lodge should have should have like a case that has all the tools. It has the level and the plumb and the gavel, right? Um, so that's kind of similar in that way. That maybe that's what I'll say is that the name signs and tokens, things like that, and then the teaching tool is
Hmm.
very similar. Now,
Sure.
the Masonic presentation has nothing to do with Adam and Eve. It has nothing to do with making covenants with God. We do make an oath, but it's more so an oath to the brothers or to the lodge rather than. And by the way, it doesn't contradict any temple covenants. I felt totally comfortable making those oaths because they were more temporal. Like I'm going to be true to the Masonic principles that I'm being taught right now, which none of them contradict. They actually complement Latter-day Saint principles of truth and morality.
Gotcha.
So,
And then what would
mhm,
you say are maybe some specific, you kind of touched on this already, uh,
yeah,
differences? For example, like one thing that stood out to me is, you know, prayer circles is something that is,
yeah,
unique in our temple endowment, and
mhm.
something that, you talk about, like you might go in a circle, but you don't
It's
quite have
not.
the same in masonry.
No, yeah. I think what I've already said may cover most of that. Um, it's really very different. Like the 1% that is the same is the idea of signs and tokens and names and passwords and things like that. It's the idea. It's not even those things themselves, but it's the idea that they are used as a means of teaching. But everything else is essentially, besides the fact that it's like a play or a drama, everything else is different, right? It's a story about a guy who was a stonemason building Solomon's temple. Like it has, like the temple endowment has nothing to do with that at all, and vice versa, right? Adam and Eve. So yeah, I think that's the best way to describe it is that it's a totally different, it's a story, right? In the temple, we're learning about the plan of salvation and the creation. The Masonic rituals have nothing to do with that whatsoever. It's a totally different story that's trying to teach moral principles through allegory, and it's actually so cool. I actually really love the Masonic rituals for what they are and also what they teach. So I hope that kind
Okay.
of answers the question. It's very different than the
Yeah.
temple endowment. Although having been endowed, I can see why people think that it's similar because of the nature of it.
Right. Similarities in the ritual and in the presentation.
Presentation,
So I
yes.
want to get your thoughts on this, and this might be maybe a combination of both, because there's kind of two different camps or theories that people might come to when it comes to the relationship between Freemasonry and the
Mm-hmm.
Temple Endowment. One is that, similar to what Joseph, maybe early church leaders, claimed, is that the endowment is a restoration of ancient temple rites, and that Masonry is maybe this degenerized, sort of apostate, corrupted form. And it was certainly an obvious catalyst, but Joseph is restoring what are like ancient rituals.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's maybe like one theory. And then the
Mm-hmm.
other theory is that, okay, Freemasonry doesn't go back anciently. it maybe dates to, medieval times in Europe. So say even if Joseph and the early leaders believed it went back anciently or back to Solomon's temple, scholarship doesn't support that. But there's a difference between the endowment, the covenants, the doctrine, but the presentation of the endowment is him drawing upon Masonry, even if it doesn't go back
Mm.
anciently. Which do you lean more with? Is it sort of a mixture of both? Because it's clear that
Yeah.
there was an influence, that it was a response to Masonry, the
Yeah.
Temple Endowment. We can see Masonic elements.
Hmm.
But do you also believe that this could be some sort of a restoration that
Hmm.
Masonry sort of played as an influence or a catalyst? What's sort of your take, your
Yeah.
position?
So to answer this question, let me tell you just a quick story. When I got raised as a master mason in 2018, I was raised on the same day as another guy. So I think I can't remember which one went first, but either I went first or he went first, and then the next guy went. They did two. They did two ceremonies because you can't do them together. It's got to be individual. Um, he and I went through on the same day to be raised as master masons to receive our third degree, and he was an active Latter-day Saint. Now, there were not a ton of super active Latter-day Saints. A lot of them were inactive Latter-day Saints in Southern Utah who were Masons. When he found out that I was an active, temple going Latter-day Saint and now a master Mason with him, he really wanted to talk to me about some of the things that he had been learning, or maybe even some personal revelation that he felt like he was receiving about the answer to your question. And so he took me out to, I drove down from Cedar City to St. George one Saturday morning and just got breakfast with him. He brought me breakfast. And to be short, his theory was that um, John, who is said to be on the earth today, I think that's fair to say for Latter-day Saints, right? That John is on the earth today. That was his blessing, kind of like the three Nephites, right?
Hmm.
This man's theory or belief was that he now, is there any record to support this whatsoever? Probably not. Maybe he could, show me some things, but he believed that Saint John, who actually plays a role in our ritual or is mentioned in our ritual, um, that he felt it was, and I don't necessarily like subscribe to this. I'm just sharing what he thought. That John, the apostle John, like Peter, James, and John, that John tried to preserve as much as of the endowment ceremony as he could uh, through Freemasonry. Like he believes John was like the perpetuator of Freemasonry and maybe even is today. Now, is there any evidence for that? No. I don't necessarily hold to that. Like, could it be true? I mean, I guess like if John's still around, and if John had the endowment and John maybe was involved with Freemasonry, there's no evidence of that whatsoever. So that's what one Mason might say. And I don't know if he holds to that today. He may have changed his mind on that. I personally would go to the catalyst theory, I think it's called, that it's that Freemasonry was a buffer, or it was a preparation for Joseph and for the other Latter-day Saints to receive their temple endowment, at least the men anyway, to be prepared to receive greater truth in a similar fashion that they already had. So, to put it simply, this is how I see it. God the Father, or rather Jesus Christ, I guess, as the messenger, giving revelations to Joseph, had an endowment ready for Joseph. He said, Joseph, here's what I need you to do, make, these covenants and things like that. And we don't have record of this, so this is me kind of making sense of it. But Joseph knew he had to present the endowment, or give the endowment, or administer the endowment, but he didn't know how necessarily. But as soon as he understood, and maybe he had a little hint of it, or maybe he understood a little bit of that before, but when he actually received the Masonic rituals, he knew exactly how he was going to do it. Now, did Joseph believe they were ancient? The Masonic were ancient? I don't know. Maybe you could find a quote here or there from Joseph, or somebody saying what Joseph said or quoting Joseph. I don't necessarily believe that the Masons have the apostate endowment, that they had these truths. It's obvious that these temple truths are actually scattered around the world, probably, like you said, in Buddhism, or like in South America, or in the Catholic Church, or wherever you may be looking. Um, but yeah, I see it more as a catalyst for Joseph preparing to present the endowment to the Latter-day Saints. Does that answer your question a little
No,
bit?
that's great. And
Okay.
one thing that I found quite interesting, and again, I don't want to make a strong case or argument for this, and I'm still sort of researching this. I'm going to do some videos on it, but I've been looking at some correspondences or correlation, shall we say,
Yep.
between the priestly initiation, which we touched on
Yep.
in the Old Testament, going through a washing and anointing, having an undergarment, putting on specific priestly robes and such, and also the coronation ceremony of ancient
Mm-hmm.
monarchs as
Yep.
well, and how they often would go through a similar washing and anointing, receiving a
Yep.
new name, a
Yep.
white undergarment, and make certain signs and gestures
Yes.
and make oaths and receive royal robes. And as I was
Mm-hmm.
going through looking at the similarities, I kind of had this thought that wow, we go through the temple endowment to become kings and priests
Yep.
unto God, and it's quite interesting some of the similarities between our endowment ceremony and a priestly or a
Mm-hmm.
coronation ceremony as well. And that to me, this almost seems bigger than just saying that he just took it from
Yeah.
Masonry. It seems like, well, we can see some things in like some ancient ceremonies that there's
Mm-hmm.
some striking similarities. I'm not
Yes.
saying identical, but some
Mm-hmm.
similar themes or elements of the ceremony. And that's something that I
Yep.
find quite interesting, that there seems to be some things in antiquity and different rituals, either early Christian or things in ancient Egyptian, that there's some similarities, you know.
Yep.
I find that
Absolutely.
interesting.
Yep. I don't have a problem with saying that the truth taught in the endowment is eternal and probably has been perpetuated through different cultures in different ways, maybe through signs or tokens or things like that. But the other part of that is the presentation he definitely got from the Masons.
Yes,
I'm comfortable
no
saying
doubt.
that, but the truths, yeah, I think are much ancient. And the Freemasons, I think. I mean, I don't know many Masons who subscribe to the literal idea that we're descendants of the actual Freemasons on Solomon's Temple. But if a brother wants to believe that, then I think that's okay too.
So I want to
But
ask sort of a critical question before you wrap up, because I'm thinking
yep.
a critic might think, and I think this is a plausible interpretation they might come to. They might
Mm-hmm.
say, you know, look, Joseph could have had access to the Bible. So
Mm-hmm.
say, you know, washings and anointings in the Bible
Yep.
of Aaron as priests. He had these different doctrinal views and innovations we can see in his revelations, but then just combine that then with his Masonic influence, and
Mm-hmm.
why doesn't that sort of, in a naturalistic way, explain the temple endowment? And there doesn't need to be
Mm-hmm.
any need for inspiration or
Mm-hmm.
revelation from God. Like we can explain from his environment, from these naturalistic influences, where he could have got the endowment from. What do you think about
Um,
someone who make that case for a
yeah.
naturalistic explanation for the endowment?
Yeah, I think if that's coming from an atheist, they're arguing in the wrong part, right? Like if I was an atheist, if I held the presupposition that there was no God, then yeah, that would seem like a plausible uh naturalistic explanation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if it was coming from a Protestant, I think their argument's a little bit stronger because they already have the Christ foundation, right? They have God and they have Jesus Christ and they have the Bible. um, I think it would actually, no, I take that back. It would be harder to make it as a Protestant, right? Um, if I was a Protestant, I'd probably say the same thing that you just said, right? That he just used the Bible. But you and I both know, and those watching who are endowed know that not everything in the endowment can be found in the Bible. Now, that being said, could Joseph have just made it up? You know, if I was to steel man them, I guess you could say that. Um, but then again, right? What if you apply the same standard to the Bible, right? What if you, um, like for example, when you ask somebody why they're a Christian, most people will say, "Well, because I believe Jesus Christ rose from the dead," right? And it, my response as a critic, well, if I was to step in the shoes of an atheist, would be like, well, you have no proof for that. And they might say, oh, the witnesses, right? But even Christians would admit that just because there are a certain amount of witnesses to an event doesn't mean the event's true. Otherwise, they believe in the Book of Mormon plates, right?
Right, right, yeah.
So at the end of the day, I also don't have a problem saying that, yeah, there definitely is some faith in this. I'm not saying that we have all the evidence or proof even. So if that's what a critic is looking for, I would fold my cards and say, yeah, I don't have what you're looking for. I hope the Protestant or the evangelical or the Catholic can appreciate that answer. The atheists will probably say, well, exactly. That's why I'm not a Christian. That's why I'm not a believer, is because there is no evidence for particular things that you believe in. Does that make sense?
No, no, totally. And I think it's
Okay.
important for people. I think it's good to understand the different interpretations one might come to based upon this evidence. And I think it's important to also understand, let's be clear about what are some things which are similar between both ceremonies and the relationship, but let's also acknowledge the differences as well, and how Latter-day Saints might interpret this more in a faithful lens. And for example, getting back to the washing and anointing, you could make that argument, and certainly I think the book of Exodus would have been an influence, but as you showed, some early documents from, it was the Catholic Church, wasn't it? And I showed an early Christian father who also were doing very striking washing and anointing rituals. So, the specific things which are similar to our own temple endowment. And of course, like the early Latter-day Saints, it was no surprise to them that this was a response to Masonry. They all knew that, so that wasn't a secret. And I suppose it's making the claim that can we see some evidence of this predating Masonry, scattered throughout in different cultures, or like early Christian stuff or ancient ceremonies. Can we see some correspondences?
Yep, absolutely. Okay. Do you want me to just wrap up here? I think I have like 2 or 3 more slides.
Yeah, let's do it.
Just really quick. Thoughts? Just really quick. I just put this in here. When I was teaching my institute class, I wanted to add President Nelson because he spoke on temples. He essentially says, well, I'll just read it. Temple patterns are as old as human life on earth. Actually, the plan of temples was established even before the foundation of the world. So if we take him as an authoritative source, which I do, I think that adds to the conversation as well. Okay, so to go back to the critic's claim, I hope that we can see that premise 1 is false, meaning that the similarities or the principles or the elements of Masonic ritual is found probably all around the world if you look in enough places, or the places you look. Premise 3, I think, is also false because the idea of an endowment in a temple was not introduced when Joseph became a Mason. It's not like he became a Mason and then just said, "Oh, this is a great idea. I need to incorporate this into my religion." Rather, he had been thinking about it for a long time, and that may have pushed him over the edge to say, "Okay, I think I know how to do this now, or I think how I can do it anyway." So I would say premise 1 and 3 are false, which in my mind, obviously, as a faithful Latter-day Saint, would say the conclusion is false. So to wrap up, and then I have one last little slide and explanation, which actually I think will answer your last question, which I'll explain. Here's my perspective as a Latter-day Saint. My premises are: 1, many aspects of the temple are ancient in their nature, what we covered. Premise 2, remnants of truth can be found in many places, right? We don't have a monopoly on truth in the church. Premise 3, God uses things we are familiar with to help teach us. He teaches truth in a way that we know we can receive it, which is why I think the presentation of the endowment has changed and should change, because we can learn differently depending on the culture and the time. And premise 4, the Lord has often used temples in his work and promised modern people temple blessings and endowments of power from the beginning of the restoration. So when I add all those things together, and assuming Joseph Smith is a prophet, I'm going to talk about that in my last slide here, this is the conclusion I get. Freemasonry became a catalyst for the early Latter-day Saints receiving what God had in store for them. It contained truth, and Joseph saw the presentation of the Masonic rituals as an effective way to present what the Lord had given him to administer to the saints, the temple endowment. That kind of answers your question from before. That is my position. And to close, I always put this at the end. And this goes back to, like, what if a critic, right, especially an atheist or even a Protestant evangelical Catholic, what if they come to us with questions, or ex-Mormons or people struggling with this, and like, how can you believe, based on what we know about Joseph and based on all the information we have, how can you believe the temple endowment was not just made up? And here is my base. And I know we have not talked about this at all, but it all goes back to this for me. And Stephen Harper did an interview, I think, with Saints Unscripted or another one, where he basically says this, and I really like the way that he says it. He says, the Book of Mormon essentially is the end all be all. Like, it is the stopping point for a Latter-day Saint. It is the base. We have to ask the question and answer the question, where did the Book of Mormon come from? I don't believe in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints because of all these cool temple rituals. Now it's a bonus and I can learn from them. But I actually start here. And I think for those who are watching this who may be struggling with, the temple endowment or with Freemasonry or things like that, know that everything I just presented to you is based in the assumption, in the belief, in the presupposition that the Book of Mormon is true, which validates Joseph as a prophet. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah,
So
it's sort of the foundation or the
yes,
keystone. It's sort of like, well, as a missionary, we would say that's the convincing evidence that Joseph,
yes,
the prophet of the restoration, and in a way, yeah, kind of it all
yes.
hangs upon that.
Yeah. So that's to say exactly what you just said. My testimony does not hang on whether how Joseph got the endowment, how he used the presentation. That's all secondary to this. Because I believe in the Book of Mormon, I don't have any issues whatsoever with Joseph even using elements of the Masonic rituals in the temple endowment. That's where I stand at this point in my life and forevermore is the Book of Mormon. Because I believe the Book of Mormon is inspired of God, I believe Joseph is a prophet. And if that's the way that God wanted to lead his prophet, then so be it. And anyway, that's kind of my wrap up here. So I hope those who are watching and watch all the way through can recognize that this is the basis, the keystone, as you said, for all of this. Um,
Awesome.
here's my email. I don't know if your viewers care, if any of your viewers want to reach out, you can put this in the description. But this is where I basically tell my students or whoever I'm presenting to, if you want to reach out, talk about this, I'd love to talk about it. If you have any questions, let's open it up. So I know we've gone about 2 hours now, and that's long for a lot of people.
Oh
Um,
no, we're used to
so
going long on this show, and I appreciate your
yeah,
time in
yeah,
presenting this. And I think you've been able to provide unique perspectives and insights.
hmm
Being a Freemason yourself, you're kind of, we're
hmm
getting this from the horse's mouth, shall we
sure,
say? No, I
sure,
appreciate getting your perspectives on Masonry and sort of like the history and origins of Masonry, and your perspective on the connections to our Latter-day Saint Temple endowment. And yeah, if people have questions for you, if they want to join Masonry and find out more about it, they can
hmm
email you. But no, I really appreciate you coming on. Any final thoughts or any final words before we wrap up?
No, no, thank you for having me on. Anyone who wants to learn more about this, there are tons of resources. Um, there's lots of answers to this. I will say this, just like any other critique of the church, don't be so quick to make a judgment call based on a few things that you hear about Joseph or the church or whatever. Dig a little bit deeper. That's what I did. Right. When I heard about these critiques of Joseph, and obviously I'm not telling you to go join the Freemasons. You could if you wanted, I guess, but spend a little time studying, make a little sacrifice to put in some effort here. Because I feel like, not everyone, but a lot of people, they hear these surface level critiques and then they let that destroy their faith, whether it be, Freemasonry or race in the priesthood or polygamy or any of the hot button topics or LGBTQ or whatever. If you spend, I think, Stephen, you're an example of this as somebody who's dove into the critiques of the church from the critics. Like, that as you put time in, you may be surprised what you find in regards to answers to those questions or critiques. So,
Yeah,
anyway,
I find that there's usually more context. There's another
yep,
side. There's
yep,
information that they're omitting.
yep,
And yeah, with more research, you can find a different perspective. I had a final thought. I can't remember what it was.
yeah.
Yes,
Sorry. Yeah,
one thought that came to me is also understanding maybe assumptions or the nature of revelation as well. I think often as
yep,
Latter-day Saints, we can grow up with this view that revelation happens in a vacuum, that it just
yep,
directly comes to Joseph Smith, that or to a prophet,
yep.
and that Joseph just received the temple endowment from
hmm
God. And understanding that revelations, there's usually something that prompts, or something in the
hmm
environment that is sort of the catalyst or the influence. For example,
hmm
a lot of the revelations in the Doctrine and Covenants come from Joseph going through the Bible, whether or
hmm
not be like, Doctrine and Covenant 76 and the kingdoms of
hmm
glory, or the Book of Moses that we talked about as he was translating, or plural marriage, baptisms for the dead, or even
Yep.
Joseph Smith's first vision. The catalyst was James 1:5, that it's often something in the environment that then leads them to seek the revelation as well. And that's maybe a paradigm or something that we have to shift, that it's often this human divine
Yep.
process as well.
Absolutely. Yep. And who knows? I mean, we'll never know maybe until the next life, but maybe the Lord used Freemasonry to provide Joseph that information or that revelation.
Yeah.
It's just it's hard to say, but it's definitely a possibility. I appreciate you saying that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm really excited. Future episodes I have that I'm going to be doing this series and future interviews. I find this a fascinating topic. And I'm going to do a few more episodes on what I see as some correlations or connections to ancient temple rites, early Christians, the Gnostics, and the coronation ceremonies of monarchs to our endowments. I find them quite interesting. So we kind of tease them out in this episode, but that'll be coming soon for listeners.
Do you know, by the way, do you know Jacob Ryder by chance? He has the By Way of Commandment podcast.
Yes, yeah, he interviewed me, well, maybe a year or two ago.
Okay, good. I was going to say, if you haven't talked to him, you should talk to him. He's real big into temple stuff. He's awesome.
Oh, okay, very cool, very cool. Well, listeners who have watched this, make sure you give it a like, comment underneath as well, and be sure to reach out to Hayden if you have any questions. Don't forget to subscribe as well. We're going to continue with this series on temples and masonry as well. And if you have any other questions or anything else you'd like me to explore in this series, let me know, and we'll see you next time on Mormonism with Murph. Take care. Thanks, Hayden.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for watching this episode. If you've enjoyed it, please give it a like, share it with others who might benefit, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future content. You can also listen to these episodes on podcast form on Anchor or Spotify, and you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Check out my website for more content, personal blog, and more. And if you care to donate to support me, you can via my PayPal or Patreon, or through the website. And you can also give donations via YouTube through Super Chats. Thanks for watching Mormonism with the Murph. Take care. Bye-bye.